What's up, everyone out there in YouTube land? It's that time again. It's been a while since the last Hip Hop Dark Web. We are on live right now. Just waiting for everyone to come in, warming up. We have a great show today. This one's gonna be for the books. And always, of course, is joining me is Dr. Derek Cologne, Pluto 7, and one of the newest panel members. We got Vix, BVDs, we got Tampa, we got Jersey, we got New York, we got Ohio, San Francisco. Tell a friend, the Hip Hop Dark Web. And if you have questions for our guest, ask them in the chat. We go deep, we dig in the weeds. We're gonna go on in 2 minutes, 2 minutes. If you're in the chat, let us know where you're from. And if you have any questions for the guests, questions for the panel, we're about to go in tonight, y'all. We're gonna go deep. I can't wait. One minute. If you have any questions for the guests of the panel, let us know. And if you're watching, let us know where you're from. Let us know where you're watching from. Hip Hop Dark Web. Yo, what's up? This is Shadow Rock and Pro 41 of the Flora Gangs and Knuckle Neck Tribe, and you are watching the Hip Hop Dark Web. I'm here with my panelists. We got Vix, we got Dr. Derek Cologne, and we got Mr. Pluto 7. How y'all doing? It's been a while since we've done this. What's been going on, y'all?
Good, man. Good.
Anything new? Anything? What's that?
Crazy summer.
Say that again? Okay, I don't know what happened to Pluto.
We lost Pluto.
So let's go down the panel again. It's been a while since we had this. This is our 4th episode, right? It's the 4th episode of the Hip Hop Dark Web. Obviously, if you're tuning in right now, the difference between the trades and the Hip Hop Dark Web is the trades is usually an interview with me and our guests, and I just go one-on-one. With the Dark Web, I got a panel of researchers. And I want everyone to kind of describe, their whole thing, their whole history in hip hop and how they started and where they're from. So I'm gonna start with Mr. Controversial himself. First of all, we're gonna start with Dr. Derek Cologne. Dr. Derek, tell us a little about yourself.
I'm Mr. Controversial, I guess. What's up, y'all? Dr. D here. Yeah, man, just a teacher. Currently a teacher, been involved in hip hop culture since I trace it back to at least 1975 in the Bronx. I love history. I love the culture. I love talking about the culture. And so that's my little contribution to what we do. And so, yeah, have the Hip Hop History channel going. It's going well. And so, yeah, great to be here tonight.
Yes, sir. And up next, we got my man from Ohio. We got Vix. Tell him a little about yourself.
So
I'm just, I'm a b-boy. Been breaking since '97. I've gotten down with Ready to Rock, the Mighty Zulu Kings, and more recently BVDs. And I'm also rock dancer, so I'm just like really pushing the rock movement. Trying to bring it back in a lot of ways, and also just I'm just a researcher. I love history, just like Derek Cologne, just like everybody on this panel. And so when it comes to b-boy history, I'm all in. So that's pretty much it.
All right. And last but not least, we got my man. This guy has been putting in work for the last decade. Pluto 7, how you doing? Turn on the mic. Sorry, turn on the mic. There you go.
What's good, everyone? Yeah, it's Pluto 7. Been involved in the culture, started breaking, from '83 off and on, throughout, to present time. I consider myself a researcher and a b-boy advocate, and I've dabbled into all the elements of the culture. I've been doing education and research on all the elements, all four, in my respected area, and slowly translated currently, so worldwide status of information. Yeah, I just, an advocate for the culture, and, just I've done a lot of research. Yeah, nothing too crazy.
All right. Okay. So as you know, it's in the Pro for One channel. So obviously you know who I am. But today is a special, very special guest. Obviously, in the past, I've had guys recently. We had Dancing Doug, who's originally from Harlem. We had Sasa, who's one of the original b-boys that were at the Hevelo and the Herc parties. And then, of course, we had the people that we've come to know as far as like the guys in the breaking scene that have made moves in the '80s. So here in the hip hop dark web, again, we want to go deep. And I talked to Dr. Derek, and I was like, you know who I want on here? I was like, I want Michael Holman, man, because we have the actual practitioners, but this guy has actually contributed to hip hop in a major way. And no one really talks about the details of how he helped contribute to this worldwide phenomenon that's still going on like 40 plus years later. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, we got my man from everywhere. He's not just from New York. He's from everywhere. He actually lived in San Francisco, and I'm San Franciscan. We got my man, Michael Holman. Get up, y'all. Ooh. Yeah. Thank you for being on the hip hop dark web. So I don't even know I think we all have questions for you. I don't know if you want to say a little bit before we go like, piranha, like a Shark Tank, and just go with questions. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael.
Well, first of all, my name is spelled Michael.
Okay.
So you got a few misspellings there. So you better probably get that right. So it's at
yes,
Michael
sir.
Holman 101, I think, for my Instagram. So let's get that straight. San Francisco, man. I was born in San Francisco. I was born in the Presidio in 1955. So that makes me 68 years old. So I'm like a senior citizen and an OG and everything else. So I'm happy as somebody who came to New York in 1978 and was fell in love with the culture that later became hip hop or became known as hip hop. I'm happy to share with you everything and anything that I was part of or witnessed or contributed to or made happen. And I guess I will qualify, since you guys are all historians and scientists and researchers, I will be very careful to tell you when I'm telling you something that I witnessed and I know for sure versus something I heard about. So there it is. Go ahead.
Right.
Do your work.
All right. Who wants to go first? I already have questions in line if you want me to just lead it off.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I watched an interview. Like I said, I've been doing my research. prior to this interview because I knew it was coming up, and I watched a lot of the interview you had with Flash, right? So, he talked. That's how I found out. Wait, this guy's from San Francisco. Wait, he went to Lowell? Like, what the heck?
Oh,
so you were
Lowell, huh?
Oh yeah, come on. If you're smart, that's the whole thing. That was a smart kid. That was a smart school, right? Like that's what it is, So I was like, okay. So you said you were there in the as far as like development of funk and soul at that time, being in LA and in San Francisco, and these are the precursors to hip hop. You said that you thought hip hop was because of James Brown. Now my question is real quick is like, was there a difference between the guys that danced to James Brown in LA and in San Francisco, or is it very similar?
Well, you're speaking specifically now of California, right?
Yes, just California.
Okay. And by the way, everybody, try to silence your mics because there's a lot of noise going on back there, and it's distracting for me. That's a great question. What's the difference between San Francisco and LA? Wow. Okay. That's the first time I've had that question, but
I told you we go deep. Yeah. We go deep.
There's a lot of jokes about that, and there are a lot of people that talk about the differences between Northern California and Southern California. But I'm going to try to keep this within the realms of hip hop, street dance, and freestyle dance. San Francisco is a city that do you hear that noise coming from? Do you hear it sounds like a can you close that? Sorry, baby. Thanks. Okay, so getting back to it. So the differences between San Francisco and Los Angeles. I'm going to start with, the later 60s. I came to, just so you know, I grew up as an Army brat. I was born in the Presidio of San Francisco, which was an Army base at the time. The oldest military installation in the Americas, as a matter of fact, because it started as a Spanish fort and then was transferred to an American military fort in the 19th century. And it had been a military installation for like 400 years or something crazy like that. And now George Lucas bought it. So
yeah. There's Lucasfilm is there now.
Yeah. So I grew up in the military. And the reason I say that is because as a kid, I lived in a lot of Army bases, lived in Fort Dix, New Jersey, lived in Germany and France for most of my childhood. And we came back to the United States and lived in San Francisco when my father was assigned to Vietnam, which would have been 1966. So we moved to San Francisco in 66. I'm going to E.R. Taylor. Then I go to junior high school where I don't know, but then in South San Francisco, then I go to Lowell High School, which is, as you were saying, an academic school for brainiacs, whatever. Yeah, I was a little smart, but it was interesting because when I was living in San Francisco during the Summer of Love in '67, when all the hippies were like blowing up on the Haight-Ashbury, and we had a house literally a couple of blocks away from there. The thing that you feel about San Francisco is that it's this place where people have come over the last 150 years looking for some new adventure, looking for freedom, looking like the gold rush, during the 1840s. That's where people came when they were looking for gold. And the 49ers, that's why we call them the 49ers. They were panning for gold. There was like a whole aesthetic and fashion that happened around those 1840s gold rush guys, the denim jeans. That's why Levi comes from San Francisco. Then later on, much later on in the turn of the next century, in the 1940s and 50s, San Francisco, besides New York, is an attraction for a lot of beats and beatniks and the poets that are coming from post-World War II. And so there's like a whole scene there. Then, and it's like a whole wave that comes to San Francisco during that time. Then after that, there's another wave in the 60s, which are the hippies. And that blows up for a good, 5 or 6 years. So there's constant waves coming to San Francisco. And then after that, there was a whole gay wave. and in the whole Castro district. So you had these waves of people coming to the West Coast, oftentimes from somewhere else, looking for freedom, looking for some other place to express themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes these were like white immigrants from other places in the United States. San Francisco, as far as people of color, you've got, of course, the Asian community, the Chinese community who had been in San Francisco for 150 years in California, who came here to help build the railroads and built their own community there. Then later on, the Japanese came, and then later on, the Filipinos came. Mm-hmm. Then you had, during the Great Migration, where Black people were leaving the South, looking for, during Jim Crow, looking for freedom, moving from, say, Florida and the Carolinas up to New York, moving from Mississippi and Alabama up to Chicago and Memphis and places like that, moving up to Detroit from Mississippi, making Motown, making the whole Chicago sound, making Harlem what it is, making Philly what it is, and creating the Philly sound. Now you had a whole other migration that people don't even know about, especially if you're a certain age or young. You just don't know these things. I have to educate my brothers and sisters in New York all the time. Black people in California are not the same in terms of the Great Migration as Black people in Detroit or in Chicago, or especially in the East Coast in Philadelphia and New York. Black people in California come, like my father, come from Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. That was a Great Migration that moved west. So all these cats in San Francisco, Fresno, Bakersfield, all the way down to LA, you ask them where their grandparents are from, they will tell you East Texas, West Louisiana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a Texas thing. That's where California Blacks are from. So, and then San Francisco had the Samoan immigration, and it had a hard, old school Chicano integration and occupation. And it was their land and Native American land before it was anybody's. San Francisco always had this mellow, mixed races, everybody hanging together, the Chinese, the Blacks, the Chicanos, the Filipinos going out to the dance together. I went for a minute to Washington High School for summer school.
I live a block away from Washington.
Okay. So I know all about what Washington, the population in Washington High School is like. I know about like the population in Balboa and Polytech and what's the cool named after the explorer where all the Chinese kids mostly go to?
Galileo.
Yeah. All these schools had strong representations of one or two different races, but when school was out and the parties were happening, the dances were happening, and people were invited from one place to the other, San Francisco is a lot like New York. San Francisco was a place where neighborhoods were small, the city's small, the population's less than 1 million, and you would have, like in the Fillmore, Black people living not too far away from Filipinos, living not too far away from whites and Chicanos, from Chinese. The city was much more integrated than LA, number one. Okay. LA is, all the Blacks are in Compton or in Inglewood or what have you. All the Chicanos are in East LA or what have you. Everybody was kind of segmented. It's very wardened off, like in Houston, 5th Ward, 3rd Ward. So LA is very broken up in huge areas by single races and single tribes and single backgrounds. It's very segregated. It's very isolated. And in some ways it's more racist because of that. San Francisco was the kind of city where, I think about high school, you have Tower of Power, bands like that. You're still a young man. Your diamond sparkling in the sand. You'd go to these dances. Chinese girls hanging out with black guys, Filipino guys dating black girls. I mean, it was mixed. People dated each other in a way that did not happen in LA. That's number one. So San Francisco and Oakland was a little more segregated and more black and white over here and blah, blah, blah. But San Francisco is very mixed up. Unlike LA, it's very mixed up. San Francisco, now keep in mind, I went to Lowell for my first year, my freshman year, but my father had come back from Vietnam and now wanted to get his master's degree. So he got an opportunity to get his master's degree at USC.
Okay.
So now we picked up the family, moved south. Now I'm living in Carson, right next to Compton, going to Narbonne High School in Torrance. And I'm like getting my mind blown by the whole LA scene. And I'll never forget one of the first experiences I had living in Carson, which was kind of like part suburb, part Compton ghetto, and I'm hearing on the radio the Ohio Players' Pain. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And all of a sudden, this more intense black soul funk energy and more of a city, larger feeling I got from LA.
Okay.
Now you asked specifically about dance. You're gonna have to find out. I'm quite verbose, so you have to be careful what you ask me.
Yeah. Just your perspective, from your observation.
Because it's hard for me to tell you. Some of this is looking back in time from this perspective. Northern California, and I'm going to include a little bit of Bakersfield, Fresno into that. Okay. Northern California, from my understanding, is known for inventing and creating many of the dances that a lot of people think come from Southern California. And I'm going to be specific and talk about the robot and popping.
Thank you.
That comes, from my understanding, from Northern and Central California by this family of brothers from Fresno and in Oakland. Kids were popping. Now, locking, of course, comes from LA because that's Don Campbell and Campbell Lock, that whole 9 yards. But I just here's my impression. San Francisco is a slow dance city, man. Put on the slow dance records. We're gonna grind. It was about dancing and having fun. A lot of different mixed people, but because LA was so much more black, I would have to say that LA was far more focused on the intensity and the perfectionism of black soul dance and how that spread to other peoples. But LA was hardcore, is a hardcore dance city, and dance is far more important in LA than it is in Northern California. Like who's doing what dance and where it started, who invented it. That because it's a bigger city. Like when you think of like a Soul Train and you think of Don Campbell, you think of Tony Basil choreographing the Lockers, and you think about the Shabadoo and all these cats, all these poppers and lockers, whether they were black or Chicano, whatever. You think of LA, attitude dancing, which later on Madonna caught onto on the West and East Coast, and it was all about voguing and everything. That was called attitude dancing in LA. They would call that attitude dancing. LA, in a very long-winded way, and I'm sorry, but I think I gave you a little bit of stuff to research too.
It's all good. It's all good.
LA,
this is why we're here. LA,
in spite of its size, let's forget about how big one city is versus the other. Because in a way, San Francisco, let's say we can include San Francisco, Oakland, and it gives it a little more heft. LA is much bigger than Northern California, but let's put that aside. I would believe, pound for pound, that kids in LA, when you look at Watt Stacks, that documentary, and you see kids dancing in the crowd, when you look at Soul Train dancing, especially the early time before it got a little lame, in later, in the 80s and stuff, when the early, like in 71, 72, 73 in Soul Train, people doing the good foot, people like starting to camel lock, doing the Soul Train line. Dance is so much more important to LA kids. They're better dancers. They go deeper into it. It's much more of a scientific, cultural research thing in LA. It's just a bigger community. And so because it's a bigger community, and keep in mind, the Black community in LA must be 10 times bigger than it is in San Francisco. And let's be honest, the Black community in any city is going to be at least the basis, the kernel, the beginnings of any kind of dancing going on in any city anywhere. LA had a huge had huge Black population. So the fact that LA had much more emphasis on dance over Northern California makes perfect sense. LA was a much more important dance city.
So, okay, I want to talk about that. I just pulled up Granny and the Robochoys, who are actually from Northern California. And I just want to, because like, I want to set that up, because then you go from that, right? You go from experiencing Northern California, and you even talk about, it was great that you talked about the history of like most of the African Americans that came were from Texas and Arkansas and coming into the Californias.
There's mostly Texas and Louisiana, though, actually.
Yeah, Texas. Okay, Texas and Louisiana. Now all of a sudden, boom, you go to New York. So that's where this is where I'm going to segue to Dr. Derek and that. So you saw the development of the like from soul to funk dancing. Like you actually kind of witnessed it through clubbing and freestyle dancing and stuff like that.
I was a locker. I mean, I locked in high school.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. There you go. All right. I did not know that. Okay. You and Ice-T.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little older than him, but yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So now you go to, and again, like I said, in the interview you did with Flash, you could think about this interview as a continuation of that interview, because I don't want to ask the same questions. You were actually in finance, right? Yeah. You actually finished school and you're in finance. And you're doing Wall Street. And what year was that?
I graduated from school in 78. And by 78 of September, I was a junior banker at Chemical Bank working on Wall Street. But, in a junior banker program where you're meant to percolate and develop for a year or two before you go out into the field. Yeah.
All right. So this is where I'm going to hand it over, but I want to segue. Was there any correlation to like, you hearing about kids spinning on their heads and spinning on their backs? Was there any correlation to like what you saw in or your time in California period? Was there anything like that? There was a connective tissue, or did you look at it like when you first heard of it, it was just like, this is a brand new thing that maybe that has no connection?
Yeah, no connection for me. It was brand new.
Okay.
I'll tell you what did connect. Maybe as you know, I dropped out for a year in college, and I joined this theatrical rock band called the Tubes.
Yes.
But before that, I had traveled to New York and went to Bethesda Fountain Sunday tea dances in Central Park, where I would see New York kids. I'm still living in San Francisco, and I'm traveling to New York with my cousins from DC, driving up in my Volkswagen and hanging out with their friends from New York. And we go to the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park, and it's just like a whole ocean of kids from all over the city coming to Bethesda Fountain with multiple boom boxes playing WBLS, Frankie Crocker rocking like, MFSB's Love Is the Message, whatever, people doing the Latin hustle. And I'm seeing that for the first time. But I'm also seeing for the first time the bus stop, which in California was called the LA hustle, which was basically line dancing. And I'm seeing freestyle dancing happening within that line dancing, and I'm seeing the way kids are dressed, wearing marshmallow shoes and Playboys and 1930s styled clothing, zoot suit type clothing, and I'm just going like, oh my God, these New York kids are so cool. It's like I could tell even just with little things like fashion and the way they moved and the way they danced and the way they spoke, that me coming from California and witnessing these New York kids, it was like I was on another planet. It was like another planet, and it was like night and day compared to like how cool these kids are versus like the West Coast. It's just like another universe. But that dance, that line dance, I saw in the Tubes as we were on tour traveling the country. and we're going to discos in every city that we would be in, you could see that dance move traveling almost like a virus from one city to the next with us. Sometimes we would be the ones starting the thing. Sometimes we would be the ones, the agents, bringing that change, or sometimes we would just see it. But dances, they move like viruses. You know, they'd have like contagions. You know, your cousin comes to visit you from Chicago and in New York, and then they take what they learned back to Chicago. So anyway, I'm digressed from your question. Your question really was, you know, did I see anything? No, when I came to New York, I did not see anything and did not think about anything but breaking. That came in a different way, which I can, you know, tell you about.
All right, cool. So yeah, I just wanted to get, you know, here's the bus stop, by the way. I just looked up the bus stop, and, you know, as far as the line dancing.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So now I'll pass it to the panel. Like, so now we're talking about your New York story. I mean, I know it's long-winded, but this is good. Like I said, I want context. I want people to know. We're
gonna end up going a little longer. I'm
you didn't think it was gonna get this deep. Yeah, you didn't think it was gonna go this deep, man. I told you we get super, because we're trying to find. We're anthropologists. We're trying to find the links.
Yeah.
And you know, once I heard that interview,
that's what I love. That's what I love. No, how did this connect to this?
Yeah.
I got a question, actually.
Go for it, Vix.
Yeah, so you were talking about the fountain in Central Park, and you know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the rock dance.
Yeah, I am. Of course I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Brooklyn rocking, and yeah, of course.
Brooklyn, Bronx rocking, and all. Well,
that's my favorite part of breaking, by the way. I never say that.
Oh, damn.
Okay.
I love rocking so much. Okay.
So me too. I'm a rocker too. We just did the Floor Lords anniversary last weekend, the rock dance event. They had a rock battle in there and everything. But you know, studying the history of the rock dance, you know, I've heard a lot of people talk about the fountain at the Central Park. And, you know, supposedly that was like one of the very first, you know, staple places that rockers used to go. And I think, you know, it's one of the places that helped rock spread.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
Through the city, besides the clubs, you know, because they had an underground rock dance club scene in New York in the early 70s. But apart from that, it was in the fountain. And so when I heard you talking about the fountain and describing that, you know, it made me think about, you know, the people that I've talked to who told me that there was a lot of rocking that went on at the fountain. But I was going to ask you if you saw the rock dance back then. Did you see it at the fountain, or what you call freestyle dance? You know, what you say you describe yourself as a freestyle dancer. Is that similar to the rock dance, or is that different?
No.
Or did you encounter the rock dance at all?
Well, to the extent that while you're doing a freestyle dance, if you're doing anything that might even be similar or emulate battling or stabbing or whatever it is that, you know, you might be doing in rocking, perhaps that freestyle is similar to rocking. But, you know, rocking is very specific. For me, freestyle is exactly what it says. It's freestyle. It's whatever you do. Like for me, when I was going out to clubs and discos, freestyling for me was, you know, doing splits, doing all kinds of footwork on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. The whole idea of like connecting with another dancer, as these two guys are doing, battling, was not part of my freestyle experience. Freestyle was just me on my own, expressing myself. But I'd like to, you know, it's very interesting. Talk about connecting the dots. You saying that rocking being having spread in at the Bethesda Fountain. I'll tell you why that makes sense to me. I can't prove this, but I'll tell you why it makes sense to me. I'd love to hear someone chime in on this. This is a time. This is 74 when I'm in college and I'm seeing this. I'm an adult. 74. I would have been 19 years old, and I'm seeing this whole New York thing, and so much of it's so intense. And so much is coming at me. And so I can't really say what I saw and didn't see. I definitely saw the line dancing. I definitely saw 50 boom boxes playing this. I definitely saw Latin hustling. I definitely saw guys hanging out, playing bottles, cowbells, congas, etc., to the radio. But that kind of style, that kind of park jam with music and congas and bongos and glass bottles with drumsticks and all that kind of happened all over the country, by the way. That definitely happened in LA. That definitely happened in San Francisco. That definitely happened everywhere. But it's different in New York. And here's why I think it's very believable that rocking would have used Bethesda Fountain as a way to spread to the rest of the city in a way. Here's why: because Bethesda Fountain is right off Fifth Avenue and 72nd Street. Fifth Avenue and 72nd Street is the Upper East Side, more or less. There's like, this is not ghetto. These are like wealthy people, but it's a time in New York where there's just like, you know, there's the city is on its knees. There's no police. Nobody's policing anybody. Nobody's telling anybody to turn music off, et cetera, et cetera. So, by the way, I don't know that that's rocking. I heard a big debate about whether that, I think track 2 was like saying that wasn't rocking. I don't think it is. But anyway.
Oh, damn. You are up to date, sir. Yeah. You know the politics.
I know. I saw the show. But here's why it's interesting. Bethesda Fountain in Central Park is not connected to any part of New York in which there's a lot of black and brown people hanging out. Like the park jams that would happen in the Bronx and Crotona Park, or the park jams that would happen in Brooklyn or in Queens or even in Harlem, whatever. Central Park is very much not any of those things. So what would happen at the Bethesda Fountain is that you would have people coming down from Harlem going, wow, what's going to happen here in Central Park on the Upper East Side? You'd have people coming from Brooklyn. You'd have people coming from the Bronx. You'd have people coming from Queens. And that Central Park Bethesda Fountain is very neutral. It's not Brooklyn. It's not Bronx. It's not even Upper Manhattan. It's not anywhere. It's very neutral. So everybody's coming together from different places, almost like that scene in the beginning of The Warriors, right? It's like everyone's neutral and they're sharing what I got this. What do you got? I got that. What do you got? It's not like, oh, this is only Bronx. It's everybody coming together. So it makes sense that Bethesda Fountain would be a place where people from different hoods would come together and share, and it would go back out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that if they were rocking at the fountain, that it wouldn't be.
There it is, right there.
The burning and all that, because the burning and all that is actually called burning.
Right.
The original rocking is actually what Frank Rojas was doing.
Right.
So the footstep, like we call it freestyle. We call it freestyle, but actually they called it rock dancing.
Okay.
But there was no burns. There was no battles. It was just a bunch of slick footwork and groove.
That I saw. Okay.
Bethesda and that was the original rock.
Okay. That's what I saw in '74. I can't speak for before. If you could go back to that picture, I just want to illustrate something. The one where you saw to the right, like the hill, the little bit of grassy knoll.
Let's see. Kennedy? I'm just kidding. No,
that's good.
It's grassy knoll. What are we talking about here? Okay, this one.
Okay, right here. You see on the right side, you see the trees.
Yeah.
See the 2 trees.
Yeah.
Now that's a hill. On that hill, and there's a hill that goes all the way around from where the cameraman is shooting this picture. All grass behind you. Up on that hill would be 50, 100 boomboxes, all tuned to the same station, supplying the music for the party that would be going on in this red brick area all around the, I would say, west side of the fountain.
Wow.
And I remember the things that really stood out for me, the way they were dressed, and these rockers, the way they were dressed, pleated zoot suit pants with like marshmallow shoes and pajama tops, with little toys and bears on them, and Applejack caps, or fedora caps and girls wearing with plucked eyebrows and wearing like Rosie the Riveter like summer dresses and platform shoes and doing the Latin hustle. That's a super New York scene, and I'm this like innocent San Francisco kid. My mind is blown. It was so hip. It was so cool, and it was different than park jams in the Bronx and in other boroughs. Was there wasn't a sound system. It was all supplied by radios.
Frosty's crew, his original crew, Rock City crew, that was their spot in the early 70s.
Frosty Freeze.
And everything that you described of what they would wear, that's what they would wear, and that's how they got down to that before they switched over to sneakers and everything. And they had pictures and everything of all of that stuff.
Yeah, Jean-Paul Goude, this French photographer, did a whole photo shoot in 1974 GQ in which he captures that look exactly. I don't know if you can try to grab that real fast.
What is it again?
Okay, look for this.
Okay.
Jean-Paul Goude, that JEAN-PAUL, and Good, GOODE, and it's in GQ magazine, 1974, and it's street style. There's like this disco shots, and then there's and they have rockers. Literally, what I'm talking about. Maybe I should try to find it. Oops.
I see Esquire.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pull this up right now. This is kind of cool pic though. It's like an artsy pic, but this is cool.
What do you see? What do you see? Oh shit!
That's right here.
Now where are you? I lost you. Oh, here you are.
Just kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, look at this picture of this kid.
That's crazy.
Look at that. It's a graffiti artist. I mean, that tells you right there. Now, I don't know if it's inside. If you look under, okay, I don't think I'm going to lose you. I'm going to look under Jean-Paul Goude images.
Send it in the private chat, and I could pull it up.
Esquire images. Let's see what comes up. Oh, okay. It's here. It's here.
Yeah, send it through the private chat. You can see it on your screen. It says private chat. You can send it over there, and then.
Okay, I'm a dinosaur, so you're gonna have to be patient.
No, but like I said, Mr. Holman, like I said, we go in. We're not just like, oh, you like the breakdance and the headspin. No, we're trying to. Like the best way I could say is we're more like anthropologists. We really try to make the links of even from the music, even like Pluto would talk about like, the needles that were in the Warrior, in the movie The Warriors, were those sure needles? This is the stuff that we're kind of into. Like we go in kind of really deep. And actually I'm actually surprised that you caught, because a lot of people, like I said, if we usually talk to a lot of the people that used to do it back in the 80s, they used to be, oh yeah, I used to do the breakdance stuff. But then, when we ask them about anything now, they're just like, what? Huh? No, the best was the 80s. Versus like you talked about track 2 and, debating the burn to get burned style rocking and the outlaw style. And then, here's Vic's talking about the freestyle rocking. It's dope that you understand. And you talked about, Tony Basil. You talked about,
Basil,
Don Campbell.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So it's just like, this is what I'm talking about. And again, as he's looking that up, I just saw on your social media that you were actually at B-Boy Summit that happened last week with where you're at the panels too. Did you get to talk in the panels at all?
I didn't. I mean, I didn't talk, but I was at the panel. I was at a panel for popping, locking panel, and then I was at a panel that Prince Paul gave. Those are the only 2 panels that I was at. And I just found that page on how you find things, images, and it had 2 of the things, but not the one I'm talking about. Oh, so pissed off. Why not? That's so annoying.
All good. But so let's open up the panel. So like I said, we went from California, and then now we're in New York. Does anybody else have any questions? We talked about the fountain. We talked about basically what was freestyle rock at the time. Does anyone want to continue with questions before we go into the 80s?
Well, I just want to follow up with the question of, if you saw the freestyle rock, what we call freestyle rock, you saw them grooving and dancing, not with a girl, just doing the freestyle. Could you say could you see how that could be a precursor to what would come later, breaking?
In many ways, yes, because, and again, you have to sort of distinguish breaking in certain periods, because in the beginning, when black dudes were breaking, if you will, and it wasn't always called breaking, in the Bronx and in New York, and frankly, all over the United States, in black communities, there was freestyle. By freestyle, and again, you mentioned James Brown earlier, Prof. One. James Brown for me is modern freestyle dance and hip hop culture in general, like, rests on his shoulders. Maybe other than writing, but it without him, I don't think any of this happens. And he's not from New York, right? He's from Georgia, but when I was in it has to kind of go back to when I was in high school for me, at Narbonne High School in 1972, in the 70s, when James Brown is coming out with another hit song that has a corresponding dance to it 4 times a year. Good Foot comes to mind. Rock Steady was not his song. That was Aretha Franklin, but Rock Steady was like a big song for us in the early 70s at Narbonne High School. And you would go on a Friday afternoon to recess during lunch to the auditorium, and somebody brought an AV, turntable and the records, and the whole room would be filled with kids during lunch just doing the Rock Steady, right? Just Rock Steady, or doing the Good Foot or whatever. But these dances, and when they became more and more acrobatic, and when it was all about dropping to the ground and doing splits, we were emulating James Brown. We were looking up to James Brown and saying, man, I can do that. And if it's just shuffling your feet, or if it's actually going into a split, or if it's actually going into a backdrop or a front drop, or doing footwork or swipes like a Russian swipes, it's James Brown that we're emulating. Yes, people like a slight digression. You have people like Jackie Wilson, who was a boxer and an athlete before he was a singer. He was doing backdrops and splits too, in a way at the same time or before James Brown. And when he went, this is a sidebar, when he went to England and was performing, doing backdrops and splits and everything else, he inadvertently started Northern Soul.
Wow.
All those kids in Manchester and Leeds and all those places, not in London, they didn't know shit about Northern Soul. And all in Northern England, that's why it's called Northern Soul. They were doing these wild spins and drops and everything else, not to emulate James Brown, emulating Jackie Wilson, interestingly enough. And you know what I'm talking about, Vix, right? Like Northern Soul and that whole
I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've seen the dance they do too. And it looks crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, English kids are all about dancing. In Europe, they are the best dancers.
A lot of floor moves, but not like breaking moves, but still floor moves.
Floor moves, exactly.
Yeah.
So now, okay, so getting back to my point, I can go off on tangents. So getting back to did it go to breaking? So early freestyle dance has very interesting beginnings. A lot of it has to do with James Brown, but a lot of it has to do with disco. I'm much more of a disco kid than I am hip hop, because when I got into hip hop, I was already out of school, out of college, had a job, blah, blah, blah. And I'm more of a, anthropologist and an impresario and wanting to help make things happen and blah, blah, blah. I'm not a young kid or a high school kid having fun at the clubs. That was James Brown. Here's Jackie Wilson here. He's probably going to do a drop right there.
Yep.
Boom.
Yep.
Boom, baby. Boom. And this is before James Brown blew up, because James Brown blew up in 60. See, this is a black thing. So now you've got black kids, mostly guys, but girls too, doing all kinds of freestyle moves in the early 70s emulating James Brown, showing love and respect to him, getting turned out by James Brown. And they're breakers. Maybe they weren't called breakers, but they were breakers. How were they different than what came in the next wave with mostly Puerto Rican kids? They didn't want to get their clothes dirty. They didn't want to, you know, spin on the floor. They didn't want to, and nobody was even thinking about doing that anyway. It was all clean dance. Maybe your hands got dirty. Maybe your knees hit the ground and your pants got a little, you know, smudge on the pants at the knees, as James Brown would. But it was all get up and dance and dancing with a girl, maybe, or sometimes freestyle dancing. If you're going to do head spins or back spins or windmills or whatever.
Can I interject something?
Sure.
Can I interject something? A narrative. You being, you know, over there from the West. How is the correlation of where the space where Soul Train? Because, you know, Soul Train influenced a lot of the early b-boys in the New York style.
Sure did.
That a lot of people don't really touch on or whatever. A lot of people from back over here got inspired by certain moves, you know, from a lot of the Soul Train dancers in the early 70s.
Yeah, and those Soul Train dancers were all accolades, or they were all children of James Brown. You can be sure of that. But LA is interesting.
Exactly.
LA is interesting because they make dance a science. They're into inventing new dances and getting granular about the dance and who did what, blah, blah, blah. But just as New York does, where Northern California is not that extreme. But LA, you're right. LA had, if you look at those early Soul Train dance moments where you see, like, and everyone's wearing big afros and they're doing backflips, they're doing all kinds of things. They're not doing I call the difference between Black freestyle dancing and Puerto Rican freestyle dancing is the difference is freestyle on your hands, flips, spins, all that, versus gyroscopic dance. Puerto Ricans, and I'm being, this is broad stroke generalizations, are going to be shorter, more compact than most Black dancers, which is why you don't see a lot of Black b-boys at the level of Puerto Rican dancers when you're talking about the late 70s, early 80s. But the Puerto Rican dancers took the dance to a gymnastic, gyroscopic place. The Black kids just weren't. It wasn't our style. It wasn't who we are. It wasn't our style of dancing. It wasn't what you would see James Brown.
Actually, there are narratives of that. We're slowly learning that there were narratives of that. It's just those narratives weren't documented. And I will say, in the next 2 years, the history of breaking is going to look totally different.
Well, but one thing I do know, and this is from talking to people like Phase 2 and DXT who were there, you know, they were doing it. They were those freestyle dancers and early breakers who didn't make that transition, because there's a gulf. There's a gulf in like maybe 75 to 78 where there's nothing happening, and Puerto Rican kids picked it up and took it to the next level. You know, in my conversations with D and with Faze, you know, rest his soul, you know, they were very much into what was going on with Black freestyle dance. And if I don't know, it you know, it moves like this, drops, spins. This is acrobatic, yes, but and you know, you can see it right here. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's acrobatics involved. But again, I make this point, gyroscopics. The ability, I can do all those things if I was 30 or 40 years younger, you know, I could figure out a way to do a backflip and go down into a split and all that. But how homies get to spinning from a dead stop like a gyroscope is like, where does this come from? I mean, it is obvious that these were kids who were also paying attention to gymnasts, who were paying attention to internal physics that's like, I'm going to set up and grab the floor and then turn and move and start to spin into a circle. That was not a Black thing. That was a Puerto Rican thing. They were the ones who picked up that baton and moved to the next level.
I will say, I'm a firm believer of access to information. And I totally understand what you're saying. I respect, everything that you're saying. But from my research, and not to blow myself up, I've done the most diligent research on the planet.
Cool.
Aside from Nor and Rad on this subject matter. New information is going to be introduced to shake things up. What you're saying is absolutely true, or whatnot. But there is a narrative from the quote unquote opposite side that shows that there is some influence from that. And then there are some Puerto Rican b-boys who are influenced by that to go on to do those things. So we're in a very interesting era of information. This is probably going to be the most prolific situation of information in the history of this. And if we don't get it right, corporations will be telling us what it is, like how it is with rap.
Well, let me say this, and again, as I said, I'm not going to speak on something that I don't know for sure. All I'm just going to speak on is what I've seen, and then what my kind of historical mind, armchair anthropological mind kind of throws together. I would not be surprised if some of the gyroscopic moves in b-boying may have been pioneered by Black b-boys, right? In the Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens or wherever, in New York, or maybe in Philly or maybe somewhere else. But what I do know, and what I can tell by simply the evidence in front of me, is that though the people who blew it up, who perfected it, who put the work in and made it breaking as we know today, are the Puerto Rican New York kids. They may have been inspired by one or two individuals who said, check this, what I'm doing. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Probably. But that didn't continue for Black kids in hip hop. What happened to Black kids in hip hop is like when I talked to Sha Rock, MC Sha Rock, who she says, I was a beat girl before I was rapping. I would go down south where my grandparents are from in South Carolina, and in the mid 70s, I'm a little teenager, go to the dance and go doing footwork and rolling around, and they look at me like I was crazy, like, what is she doing? And she's doing the New York thing, right? She did that so many, but she moved on to being an MC. So many people started as dancers. I'm sure Kaz did. I mean, he started as a DJ too, and then he went on to MC. DST started as he was a Ronin b-boy. He would bring his own records to the club. That's why they were called Ronin. They'd bring their own records to the parties to make sure, hey, you got to play this so I can get down as a freestylist. Then he becomes a DJ. But the people who you have to recognize are Latino New Yorkers, and specifically Puerto Rican New Yorkers, who took Black freestyle dance, which I think comes really from the South and comes from all over Black America. They were the ones who said, yo, what was that he did? I mean, it could be all accidental, but they're the ones who said, I got to try that. And so many brothers and sisters that I've talked to said, we just weren't going to roll around on the floor. We weren't going to spin on the floor. We weren't going to get our gear dirty. And that simple idea could have been that thing that separates an evolutionary arc. Sometimes the evolutionary arc gets broken by geography, by weather, by disease, by all kinds of things, that a reason why a flower or an animal or a different thing stops evolving or whatever. It can be, there's always like some reason why something stops evolving for some reason. Just simply not wanting to get your gear dirty it would have been for me. I wasn't going to get my gear dirty when I was in discos and I was doing all kinds of freestyle moves and drops and splits and everything. The idea of rolling back and doing a back flip, and I could have done that. As a matter of fact, I know how to do that. I can still do that. Roll back, handstand, pop on your feet. I would never have done that at the club. I just wouldn't have done it. And I think there's enough kids who wouldn't have done it. Not everybody's the same, but there would have been enough kids who would have said, I'm not doing that. That would have caused a break. And that break lasted a couple of years. It wasn't a smooth transition. And all of a sudden, b-boying pops up. I mean, headspins, we all seen that film from 1890, isn't it? Or 19-something, 1901 or 2, where this kid, white kid's doing a headspin on the streets of New York. Nothing's new under the sun, but.
Yes, sir. All right, so just to let you know, we're an hour in and we haven't even gotten to the 80s. We haven't even gotten to the 80s yet. We're still talking we're talking about, this is like 73, 75-ish we're talking about. And I definitely want to get to the 80s because we haven't even talked about your contributions yet. But before we move on, because I want to make sure everyone in the panel says something about the 70s before we even move on to the 80s. So we haven't heard from Dr. Derek. Dr. Derek, do you have anything to say?
Yeah. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think I would just ask Michael. So interesting conversation right now. I've heard, and I'm not sure whether I should call names or just, I've heard somebody say that, because you made this very interesting difference between, so we see the early B-boys, the early African-American B-boys who were very much more sporadic in their footwork. People like Little Boy Keith, Frosty Freeze was a great example of almost this just sporadic movement. And then there's the Puerto Ricans who do these moves that almost lend to the ability to transition into other moves. Right. And I wanted to hear your I think you spoke on it, but would you say, in what you know, the B-boys or the people that were called B-boys, the Trixies, the Sasas, the Dancing Dougs, the early Herc B-boys,
right?
Would you say that they were B-boys or were they burners? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I don't know how you have to tell me the difference in your mind, the difference between B-boy and burner.
Okay. Yeah. So you guys brought up burning.
You mean burning and battling. I get it. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Sort of the up top burning stuff as opposed to top rock to floor rock. What are your thoughts on that? I have my thoughts. I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I think I'm understanding you as a B-boy. I would associate a B-boy with a freestyle, with as the extension of the evolution of a freestyle dancer, mm-hmm. and a burner as the beginning of battling. But then again, I may be dead wrong about how you're defining the two. And are you saying like burning in respect to rocking?
Yeah. So like, I'm trying to give a good example.
Yeah. A lot of these guys, they would say they call themselves like a Charlie Rock. The precursor for them, what they were doing was burning, which was like, and that's the thing is like, we don't know if it's similar to rocking or up rock or the rock dance. There's like, the story is right now that they're coming to is everyone did it in New York, but everyone had their own style, but everyone kind of did it with it, if they interacted with each other or not. Maybe the Bronx did it a certain way, but it was just like, they said they were burnt, like the guys like the first DXT, the Charlie Rocks, the Sasas, the Trixies, the Dancing Doug said they would burn and they would hit the floor periodically. But it seemed like when I interviewed Sasa, he was the one that was like, I got rid of all that and I went straight to the floor. But it was still like, but the way they would talk about the way they would dance against each other, they would have a whole song to themselves. Like Herc would play one song and then the other dancer go out and he had his song. And that's how they would battle. But it was still the whole confrontational thing was going on that developed at the break.
When you say burn, you got to be burning somebody.
Yeah.
Burning by definition is a rocking thing. It's battling. Whereas you could be a b-boy and just be like on your own at the club in the corner, or it's so interesting because I remember being at the clubs, and you have to understand, hip hop is the child of disco. Disco gave birth to all this, all those park jams. That the essence of what the creation, the genesis of hip hop culture is the park jam. Without the park jam, there's no hip hop. And by the way, the engine that fed hip hop culture is middle school kids, not high school, not college, not older, middle school. They were the engines that drove hip hop culture. They were
all of the great events that happened were at middle schools.
Yeah. And you know something? When I first started going to the Bronx and seeing these events, I didn't know any of that history because I was not a New Yorker. I didn't come to New York and to live until 78. I would just look around and see all these 14-year-old kids, rocking to Bam Bam. Bam and Jazzy and Herc and everybody are in their teens, older teens and 20s, but the crowd are all 12 to 14. And I noticed this, and I would talk about this many, many years later and talk about how middle school kids were the engine of hip hop, of the genesis of hip hop culture. And a lot of people who were those middle school kids would say, "You're right. I never noticed it, but we were." It wasn't, as a matter of fact, if you went to the Bronx, and this I can speak to, in 1981, and if you're like some tourist, some fanboy today, say, "Oh, I've got a time machine, and I'm going to go back to the Bronx in 1981. And I'm going to walk around, and it's going to be Cool Herc over here, and it's going to be like B-boys over there, and everyone's going to be wearing mock necks and blah, blah." No. Everybody who could, meaning people who had a job, who could afford to buy gear, who could buy hard shoes and take a girl out, I'm talking high school and older, would be going downtown to see the Gap Band, would be going downtown if they were cool to see Funkadelic. They weren't hanging out at the park jams. You know what they would say? They'd say, "I don't want to go to that old hippie hip hop shit. I'm going downtown to see a proper rock band, or a proper soul band, or see James Brown, or blah 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 at Bonds, or at the wherever. I'm not hanging around the neighborhood in the park, in the grass, and that was middle school kids. Why? Because they didn't have the money, and they didn't have the freedom, and they weren't old enough to have dates to go. So what did smart entrepreneurs do? They set the disco up at the park. Those were discos. The difference is, at a disco downtown, the manager of the disco would say, "How come you're not playing, wall-to-wall disco tracks that I hear on the radio?" That's what you had to do. If you were a DJ like Herc or Bam or Flash, you could play whatever you wanted. So you did play disco, you did play MFSB, you did play the Tramps, you did play, Donald Byrd, but you mixed in whatever you felt like playing. You mixed in the Mexican if you were smart and you knew your music. You did mix in, obviously James Brown and Jimmy Castor Bunch and on and on and on. And those songs are, I have to explain to a lot of people who don't know or outside of the culture, those songs are hip hop songs. Rap songs are rap songs, but hip hop songs are the classic soul and funk tracks that were already 10 and 15 years old in the 70s when these DJs were playing them. Those were hip hop songs. And it was meant to be a disco for kids who couldn't go downtown to hear the disco songs that they heard on the radio that they really wanted to hear. And it kind of accidentally, without anyone with all these forces coming together that only New York has. That's why hip hop happened in New York and it didn't happen anywhere else. All these forces swirl around. And I can see it because I'm not a New Yorker. I can see objectively. All these forces were tribes living side by side in neighborhoods, Italians, blacks, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Greeks, Jews, Italians.
Many of the DJs in our culture that we revere as the founding fathers the culture. You know, in interviews they said, they took records from their parents.
Yeah, because they weren't old enough necessarily to know these songs. I'm actually older than most of them, funny enough, because I know these songs. But I would talk to them. A lot of times they don't want to say their age or whatever. But yeah, they would be taking them from their parents or older brothers and sisters' record collections, crate digging in the apartment without having to go anywhere and crate digging. It was simply a disco. But in creating a disco with the most potent audience, which is middle school kids, are the most attuned to new dances, new music, peer pressure, wanting to impress people because you're just starting to get your hormones flowing. All that energy with a few smarter, older brothers and sisters like the DJs and like some of the writers and blah, 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 who were involved, kind of guiding you, created this fertile ground in which the idea of hip hop could grow, but it had to be in New York City. Because if it could have happened in Chicago or Houston or LA, it would have, but it didn't. Happened in New York. And I know it couldn't have happened anywhere else.
Because there were similar influences and there were similar things and movements that were going on in those areas at the same time that was going on in NY. But NY having so many things of various cultures, and influences and people and the quote unquote melting pot is what triggered a lot of those stuff. When I do research and when I even do research on my crew and I look at the OGs, I pay attention to their age, and then I realize they're like for instance I'm a member of TVB, and then you have Zulu. There are stories between the two interactions of the two of them, and a lot of the Zulu brothers and sisters, they were older because some of them come from baby spades. So their narrative, they have a little older, slightly older narrative, anywhere between 3 to 6 years. And that really dictates a lot of things. And that says a lot of things. A lot of people just look at history right up in front. But when you really break down history and you get intricate with the history, you find so many answers to a lot of questions, that a lot of things that haven't been answered or what a lot of people have historically haven't said. And a lot of the things that you've been breaking down tonight adds to that.
And speaking of gangs, Chicago had gangs, Philly had gangs, LA had gangs. There were gangs in Houston and everywhere else. And as we know, in many ways, some people argue that. I mean, I remember Faye saying, I wasn't in any gang, whatever. Why are you trying to say the gangs, bringing the peace to the gangs brought this? But it did. Bringing the peace at the Boys Center in 71.
The Hoe Avenue?
Hoe Avenue. Sorry. Hoe Avenue Boys Center.
The Hoe Avenue, yeah.
That Karate Charlie and Yellow Benji brought that peace through the Ghetto Brothers in 71. Absolutely played a role in the creation of hip hop. In that when they brought that peace, now a lot of kids in different neighborhoods could mix and whatever, but there were gangs in other cities that brought peace, whatever. What was the difference? The difference is New York. Take for just one example. In New York, in parts of the Bronx, you could make a circle in a mile and have 8 different tribes in there: Greeks, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Italians, in 1 mile radius. You couldn't do that anywhere else. Everywhere else, everyone's warded off. Everyone's separated. In New York, this is the media capital of the world, and it's the cultural capital of America. You have in New York City, you have Lincoln Center, you have the ballet, you have the opera, you have art galleries that are internationally known, that are internationally important.
The film school.
You have acting schools, you have the theater, Broadway. You don't have that in any other city in the United States. Therefore, even a kid from the ghetto of the Bronx who comes from a single parent home, who doesn't have much money, who's not college bound, and et cetera, has through school, through accident, access to things. For example, maybe you're a teenager. Maybe your uncle is a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum, and he gets you a job there. Maybe your sister's cousin is a beautician working at a particular beauty parlor in the 1960s, and Twiggy from London gets her hair done there, and you got a job there, and you're rubbing shoulders with international stars. It doesn't happen in Houston, doesn't happen in Chicago, doesn't happen in LA. You got a job in LA. You're working in Compton where you live. You're working in Inglewood where you live. You don't have that access with the subway system that takes you everywhere. That doesn't happen in LA. That doesn't happen in California. That doesn't happen in Texas. New York was designed to have a blood system, a circulatory blood system that reaches every borough. It's designed to have industries that employs everybody. It's a small city, especially Manhattan, but the city is small, and people live block by block.
It's a synergy of so many things going on.
Exactly.
And since they're so on top of themselves, it creates influence. It regurgitates something. When people take from another person's culture and they add on to what's already out there, etc., and then it recreates itself into something, and it has a multi-influence.
I'd like to add something to this that I'd never thought of before, and it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of middle school kids. I think that after a while, you start to get calcified and you start to get set in your ways as you start to get older, and you want to get a job and you want to impress this girl, and you better be conservative because she doesn't like anybody rolling around the floor or doesn't have a job or blah, blah, blah. But when you're a middle school kid, I think that you are old enough and mature enough from childhood and adolescence to kind of start thinking on your own. You can get around, you can get a job, you're growing, you're starting to get smarter and smarter, but you're not as old as high school where you're starting to become more and more calcified and more conservative. And I think that because, and there's many elements that created hip hop, but because it was so focused on the audience of middle school kids, I think those middle school kids are far more open to new ideas and change and jumping on the floor and doing a move or wearing this or spray painting that or boosting spray cans or doing crazy things.
They were very advanced.
And New York middle school kids are going to be more advanced than anywhere else. But the nature of middle school kids in general allows for a platform of ingenuity, new ideas, breakthroughs, trying new ideas. And if it had been up to high school and older kids, even in New York, I don't think hip hop would have happened.
Word.
The way it did.
All right. Yo, okay, so I have to segue because you know how this is going. You already know this. Michael's like, I'm gonna be here for an hour. Now it's like, now we're going in. All right, before we do that, before we move on to the 80s, because we're gonna get into the late 70s, 80s, early 80s, we're gonna go to the chat real quick. Andrea says, peace and blessings, stopping by to show support to comrades. You were on there. iRock says, did you get cut off, Pluto? He says, peace, y'all. He's from Hawaii. Randy says, liar for some reason. Don't know how long ago that was. Randy says, y'all got Cologne passed up his bedtime again? Yep, we did. Jennifer Thompson says, I'm loving this series. I'm learning so much. You guys are archiving this information. It would be nice to see this in some type of museum, online, or physical location. I agree. Rico Suave says, with all due respect, Puerto Ricans were from the beginning and took b-boying to the next level. Rico Suave says, also, DST is half Puerto Rican.
That's true.
Rico Suave says, what is black? We were also coined this term as well. Rico Suave says, black is a generic label. Randy says, B-boys went on to become DJs, MCs, etc., not the other way around. DXT, Adrena says DXT is half Puerto Rican.
Didn't we say all this? Didn't we?
Yeah. This is like they're commenting as we were talking about this. Randy says that shit don't come from the South. Ooh, Randy, shout to Randy. I don't agree. It does not come from the South. Okay, there's another.
Yes, it does. In many ways.
Randy says Cologne. He's referring to Cologne. He's asleep. Andrea says there's so much overlooked that is being regurgitated and has been falsely repeated over time, leading to people who believe otherwise. Randy says, who's that up there? That's Vix. Matt Kilogram says, peace, yo. Remember, this is throughout the last hour and a half, so we're just catching up. Yeah. They played everything. Rico Suave says, I'm older here. The discos were not where you went to play disco. It was a place to play music. Randy says, Profo, ask him what park jams did he went to in the Bronx. So, okay, we're almost caught up. So you can answer that right now.
Yeah.
What park jams did you go to, Mr. Holman?
Mostly was Bambaataa, Bronx River.
Bronx River. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to.
I went to a few different ones, but Bronx River is the ones I mostly remember. Yeah.
Okay, word. That makes sense. I want to get through this chat so I can get to the next segment. We're gonna go straight to the 80s. No one has to say Al Capone was a gangsta. Yellow Benji did that. May he rest in peace. Wepa. Randy says, big up Michael Holman. Jeffrey Thompson says, the early 80s also saw 2 recessions. Adults were struggling. Pluto says, IROC says, Pluto, your mic is off. Yeah, he has to do that because of background noise. The boosted from Michael Holman. Can you speak on the first hip hop film you made? We're about to go there. We're almost there. And Rico Suave, how did it come from the South?
James Brown's from the South.
All right, there you go.
That's the answer right there. James Brown.
Andrea Casas he played everything. Wendell, Andrea, you were there. Okay. And then I have the same question. The problem is when we're doing this conversation and doing the chat, I'm not in real time. So mind the chat.
If I could just address the South issue, because that came up a number of times, and I'll be brief. So what we're talking about culturally is, and if you want to use black or not use it, or I get it, we're all one race, a human race, but so much of American culture, which is soul, funk, all those things that we know comes from Detroit, it comes from Chicago, it comes from Philly, it comes from New York. These are all movements. Ohio players, even Memphis. These were musical cultural movements that were created by second generation black people who had moved from the South during Jim Crow, during the turn of the last century, in the 1910s to the 1920s, who moved up to Detroit, who moved to Chicago, who moved to Harlem, moved to Philadelphia for jobs and for opportunities and to get away from the Ku Klux Klan and assholes in the South. They moved into the North. And that is 90% of the population of black people in northern cities. And their cultures came with them. And very much all the soul music from the Isley from the Isley brothers to Curtis Mayfield to all of Motown. These are all first and second generation Southern people who brought their Southern styled soulful R&B rhythm and blues music with them, tightened it up north because of industry and because of a lot of different things, and transformed it as they transformed in the North and through industry and through new kinds of opportunities, being up in the North where it's cold and all kinds of different changes like that, and created a lot of the soul music that we know today that's important. But no one's more important in my opinion, to black and soul music than James Brown. And I think any musician will tell you that. And he never moved to the North. He was always from the South. He traveled the world, but he's from the South. So, and James Brown to me is there are many, maybe there's many mothers to hip hop culture, but there's like one father, and it's James Brown. That's how it came from the South. So recognize.
All right.
So, I want to say, can I say something real quick? Real quick,
because we're almost an hour 30 in, and we haven't gone to the 80s yet.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think the people don't make the distinction between um, having an influence on hip hop, and have been creating hip hop,
Good point.
because hip hop had tons of influences,
Right.
and everybody says hip hop came from salsa, hip hop came from James Brown, hip hop came from this, came from that. But in reality, hip hop is a like a melting pot of a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And James Brown is one of the biggest ingredients, but not the only ingredient.
Absolutely.
So I would say that James Brown is like a grandfather of hip hop because he was not actually hip hop, but you can't mention hip hop without James Brown.
Absolutely.
So for me, he would be like a grandfather, one of the biggest influence or precursor. But hip hop itself would have to be from the Bronx or from New York.
Right.
But that doesn't say that James Brown didn't have a role. He had a major role, and he influenced it.
I mean, and again, we got to get on. But to your point, I was teaching a course during COVID online at Pace University. I was teaching a screenwriting course, and one of the students was a young girl, a junior, a freshman, a junior, a sophomore from Atlanta, and I was telling them a little bit about who I was. And, I was telling her about I was there, when bringing hip hop downtown and as an OG and, talking about hip hop starting in the Bronx. And she was like, what? I thought hip hop started in Atlanta. So I was like, what? So in a way I could see people saying, wait a second, man, hip hop didn't start in the South because Atlanta has such a big imprint on hip hop now. But
this is why we do what we do.
I mean, to be honest,
this
in China,
we do what we do.
In China, they think hip hop comes from Korea, which is even worse. I've heard it. I've literally heard it.
Crazy.
I've heard it.
In Asia, I could see why they would say that. I could see why they would say
you know
that.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so this is gonna segue because we gotta go there. We're already like an hour 30 in. We're gonna talk about this
We'll do
really
it again
quick.
sometime, man. We'll do it again.
Yeah, right here. We're gonna talk about this. We're gonna talk about this footage right here. And can you tell us about this footage, Mr. Holman?
Okay, well, this is interesting. This is at Negril, which was my club with Ruza Blue, which was arguably the first hip hop club in the world. And now you say, wait a second, how could some club down in the East Village in 1982 be the first hip hop club in New York when you've got the Disco Fever in the 70s and the Stardust Ballroom and all these different clubs in the Bronx? I'll tell you why. Because Stardust Ballroom in the Bronx and Disco Fever and all those clubs had rappers going back to 78, 77, 76, had DJs, but they didn't have B-boys. They didn't have writers. Negril was the first every Thursday night for like a couple of months had all the elements of hip hop. And it was in the East Village. So that's a bug out.
Yeah. So now we're getting you were basically
that footage you were talking about, it showed is a battle between the Floor Masters and Rocksteady. And the story behind how that happened is fascinating. And
let's hear it. This is why we're here. This is why we're here.
Right. It takes a minute. Okay. Let me start now. As you may know, my first real hip hop exposure was through Fab Five Freddy in 1979 when we put on the Canal Zone party for the Fabulous Five, which is a writing collective with Lee Kiones, Slave, Doc, Mono, and Fab Five Freddy. And I helped put that party on. I met Jean-Michel Basquiat at that party. We started my band Gray, blah, blah, blah. Years went by. Gray broke up, and now I'm looking for films to make, something interesting to do by 1981 when Gray broke up. And I hear about these kids who were spinning on their heads. I didn't know about this. And I heard that they were called Breakers. And I wanted to film them. And I heard about a party that Henry Chalfant, he's really the first to bring the culture downtown. He's got to get props. And he did the show called Graffiti Rock at Common Ground in 1981. And it was going to have Ram LZ, Fab Five Freddy, the Rocksteady crew, and who was DJing? Somebody else was DJing. blah, 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 blah. It didn't happen because the ball busters came in and broke it up. Didn't happen, which allowed me to be the first in something. But I went there and I found these kids hanging on the corners. IBM, Incredible Breakmasters, with Chino, Eddie.
Yeah,
Chino
shout
from
out.
Eddie.
Yeah.
I mean, not Chino from New York City Breakers. So I was like, yo, can I film you? I just wanted to film some bugged human action because I had already made a film called Vincent Gallo as Flying Christ, which was this in-camera stop-motion animation. And I wanted to continue this idea of filming weird human motion on film. So I saw these kids on the corner at the Common Ground Graffiti Rock event, which never happened because the ball busters broke it up. And I said, hey, are you guys breakdancers? They, yeah, we're breakdancers. What do you call it? We're IBM, Incredible Breakmasters. Can you do a head spin? I want to film it. I had my Super 8 camera with me. They're like, well, we're not going to do a head spin here on the concrete. I learned later on what that meant. But I said, well, would you come to a certain place and I'll film you? I started wanting to do some wild human animation. I got next to IBM, and instead of them serving me as a filmmaker, I got sucked into hip hop culture through them. And the footage that I shot is partly in this film. So I'm making this film called Catch a Beat. This is right now, that's the Mud Club. That's IBM dancing at the Mud Club. I'm filming them at the Mud Club. You saw some footage from the Dynamic and Rocksteady Crew battle in Lincoln Center. This is Dynamic Rocksteady Crew. That DJ is Ram LZ's DJ from Far Rockaway. That's the Treacherous 3 at Bonds opening up for The Clash when you saw the rappers. This is the Mud Club again. That's Eddie and Chino rocking together. These are some more of the IBM crew at the Mud Club. So this is all happening as the downtown new wave scene's happening, the Mud Club scene's happening. I'm bringing these kids to the Mud Club to dance and film them, and I'm being selfish. I want to make my film with all these breakers, and I didn't know at the time that the culture would disengage me from everything I thought was important and suck me into the culture and say, no, you're serving us. You're going to become an entrepreneur. This is in Queens.
Hard. Who was that?
That was in Queens.
That was Eddie Ed, right? Wasn't that Eddie Ed in the mirror?
No, that was a I don't know his name, but that was a dynamic kid who I was filming at a project community center with that lady.
When you say IBM,
that's Incredible Breakers.
Yeah, from
Chino, Sammy, Brian, Float, all those guys.
Yeah, from Manhattan, right? Yeah, IBM, Incredible Breakmaster. That was.
I never heard him called IBM. I've always heard him called Incredible Breakers.
No, Incredible Breakmasters. This was This would have been 81, so I don't know anytime before or after. There they are now, rock battling Dynamic on the left and IBM on the right. And I kind of interjected that wrestling as a kind of comparison kind of thing. Maybe that was sacrilegious, but Little Lep is that's Legs right there. That's IBM at another club called Interferon. That's Legs again. That's Little Lep right there. So anyway,
Little Lep battled with Rocksteady, didn't they?
He and Flip Rock was in Rocksteady for a minute.
That's crazy. I just read that in the book, and I don't think nobody knows that.
What's that? The Doze.
That was Doze putting on the sunglasses in the crowd. That's Little Lep right there. Right there, that's Lep.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. But I gotta ask, who do you think won?
That was a really, you know what? It was really too hard to judge. And I was filming, and it was really hard for me to be objective and watch without filming. So I'm looking through the whole thing through my camera.
You would say they was both good? Like they were both top?
Yeah, I would never say who was. But you know, but I will tell you who won the battle in Dynamic in Beat Street. But you were asking me about Negril, and I went off on a tangent.
No, that's all good. That's what happens in this show. You know what I mean? Especially if I pull up a clip, and that was the first time someone narrated that footage to us, because that's the
Yes.
we could see who Legs
Yes,
is. It's
bro.
kind of clear.
Yeah.
But everyone else is kind of like, okay, you see, if
You
someone's
don't know
doing
who
a
they are.
spider, that's dynamic. I think that's pretty much dynamic.
Yeah.
But then the fact
And
that
when
you
the
talked
kid
about Incredible Breakers being in that was like,
Yeah.
oh shoot, that
Yeah.
gives a lot of like, you know what I mean?
But they weren't Rocksteady; they were ringers.
Word.
Rocksteady brought them in to battle because they didn't have any rockers really to battle Dynamic, who were good rockers. So they brought IBM in to kind of make believe they were Rocksteady.
Did you? Has anybody seen those pictures that Kenny posted up a little while ago? About almost a month ago. It was Jimmy D, Kenny, what's his name from New York City Breakers? Little Let, right before the battle. It's a dope picture.
Before that battle?
Right
No, I never saw that. Wow.
It's on Kenny. It's on Kenny's Facebook page.
Photographs, still photos?
Yeah, it's a photograph of that time. Great photo.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, let me just tell you really quickly. So I told you about the Canal Zone party where I met Jean-Michel Basquiat and we started Gray, but it was for writers, really. Nobody else in hip hop, just writers. Couple of years later, I'm already filming, doing my film, right? Doing Catch a Beat. I managed IBM. I started to represent and manage a Rocksteady crew. And I find out from my friend, this English guy named Stan Peskett, whose loft it was, the Canal Zone loft was, he said, hey, Michael, a friend of mine who I went to university with in England, Malcolm McLaren is coming. You got to come because, you got to meet Malcolm. And I'm thinking to myself, hell yeah, because I knew Malcolm was somebody who made things happen in the world, right? He took punk rock and made it international, even though it started in New York. Don't get it twisted. Punk rock came from New York. People think it came from England. It's not true. It came from New York with the Ramones, television, the New York Dolls. He took them to England, and that made them want to do the Sex Pistols, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, but I wanted to meet Malcolm McLaren. At this stage, Malcolm McLaren is representing Bow Wow Wow and the whole new romantic movement with Boy George and Culture Club and all that stuff, right? So yeah, and this is way later. This is like Buffalo Gals, right? This would be years later. So I meet Malcolm McLaren, and he said, and my friend says, you got to talk to Michael. He's doing this thing in Uptown. There's no culture. So Malcolm's like, sure. So I said, I'll take you up there to show you. So I get on the phone. There's no cell phones. And I get on the phone, my friend Stan Peskett's phone, and I call up Bambaataa. And I'd already interviewed Bambaataa for the East Village Eye article in which I'm the interviewer and the writer, and he's the interviewee. And he defined hip hop. First time hip hop had been used in a publication for the first time it ever used in a publication when it came out in January 1982. But we're going back to 1981 in the summer. And so I basically take Malcolm McLaren up to the Bronx to experience a park jam. This is in July in the summer at Bronx River Community Center, outside the community center. Blows his mind. He says, yo, Michael, I'm going to give you $3,000, put together an opening act for Bow Wow Wow at the Ritz, which is on East 11th Street in the East Village. Now it's called Webster Hall. And I do. And so I have a Rocksteady crew who I was already managing at that time, or at least representing them, getting them gigs. Rocksteady crew dancing, Bambaataa and Jazzy J on the turntables, Bam just playing records, Jazzy turntablism, and Ike C on the mic, showing my film on a big screen. And it wasn't from Tat's crew, it wasn't Brim, but it was somebody else writing. And it was the first hip-hop all-element live show for a paying audience. Again, that shit was going on in the Bronx years before, but with breakers on stage, writers on stage, hip-hop film on stage, I did it first. It was September 14th, 1981 at the Ritz, paying audience, all the elements of hip-hop. Ruza Blue, who's this English girl.
So hold on.
Sorry.
Because I'm you know, start.
Correct me. This is what we're here for.
Can we honestly say, from a technical standpoint, that hip hop culture, all four elements being practiced at once,
right?
If nothing else was before then isn't that the right time frame of that?
Here goes the 50th. Here goes the 50th debate.
Here's the thing.
I was going to go there, but I let somebody else go there first.
Believes in the 50th and celebrating the 50th, they're full of shit.
Oh,
I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're KRS-One. I don't care who you are. You know, you're full of shit.
Let me say something. I don't have the balls to say.
I do.
To chime in. But let me tell you what I just talked to Pexter, powerful Pexter from the New York City Breakers, who's coming out with a book I'm very excited about. He said exactly what you said. He said
people are starting to learn.
He said that when you cats brought hip hop downtown, in many ways we were accidental anthropologists. We thought that all these artists, DJs, MCs, dancers, and writers knew each other, were friends, were doing this shit in clubs in the Bronx for years. And we, downtown, you know, no wave, new wave punk rockers, that's kind of what we were, right? We heard about you. We saw dancers. We saw breakers in in Times Square. You know, we saw these things. We heard about these things. And so a few of the curious ones, myself, Freddie, Charlie Ahern, who made Wild Style, Henry Chalfant, Martha Cooper, who was the first journalist. When we were bringing you guys downtown, when we were bringing hip hop artists downtown, we didn't know that this B-boy didn't know that DJ, or that DJ didn't know that writer, or that writer didn't know that rapper. But as long as we were paying them from the club's budget, they're like, fuck it, I'll come downtown and perform. In some ways, in many ways, but I won't say absolutely. Let me be careful. The downtown impresarios like Henry Chalfant, Fab Five Freddy, myself, Charlie Ahern, and Martha Cooper, when we were bringing you guys down, bringing hip-hop artists downtown and putting on a show that we thought was going on uptown and had all the elements together, in many ways, if we didn't do what we did, hip-hop would never have happened, at least not the way it did. It would not have spread around the world. And there's an argument for it coming downtown in 81 being the beginning of hip-hop as a multi-element thing. Because where did it happen uptown like that?
Well, all the elements were present at the park jams, like Bronx River?
Well, you know, that's a good point. Not really, but there would be writers. And you know what? You know, you might be right about that. And that's where I'm being hesitant, because in an official way, with paying audiences, going to a club and paying for this and seeing this in a club, it happened downtown first with all the elements. But Pluto, at those park jams, would you have seen writers, you know, and rappers and DJs? Yes, rappers and DJs and B-boys. Yeah, writers too. I'm not so sure.
And 77 at the earliest.
At the earliest. Yeah,
at the earliest, 77.
Because so, before that, rap wasn't around.
Like I said, you know, technically, from a technical standpoint, for me, my research, and I'm still looking, you know, to negate that, my own research is that 77 is the beginning of hip hop culture, you know, with all four elements. Shot Rock said it too. A lot of people have said that.
The reason is
right now are not, a lot of our OGs and pioneers are not doing research. They're just cashing in for a check.
Yeah.
The reason they say 77, Shot Rock and all, and I agree, because that's the first time you see all the elements together. Because at Cool Herc's early parties, there were no rappers.
Well,
besides Cool Herc, I mean, besides
Coca Rock was hyping. He may not have been a rapper. He was hyping the DJs,
and he wasn't on beat. So he wasn't really like doing what modern day rapping.
It was more rhymes.
Hey, they said Cool Herc wasn't on beat. There's a few OGs that say that. I'm not saying nothing that they didn't say.
Can I tell you something?
We've heard it. We've definitely heard it.
You want me to get into real trouble? You want me to get into real trouble? Again, I'm 68. I'm as old as the oldest of them or older. I'm 68, and I'm not from New York, so I have a little bit of objectivity, and I know a lot about the disco scene. I'm friends with real disco pioneers like Nile Rodgers, and I've had conversations with his engineers and producers when they were making their music and whatnot, and I can tell you something, just what I experienced in college in 73, 74, 75, going to discos in San Francisco, having DJs come to the disco from New York, mixing the same record, extending the beats. So when people say that hip hop invented extending the beats, that's not true. Disco did. As a matter of fact, a lot of disco DJs were taking quarter-inch tape and cutting quarter-inch tape.
The concept of the extended song and the 12-inch comes from disco music culture.
Disco DJs.
The intro of a disco record was like 2 or 3 minutes before the song ended.
With mixers. I saw that when I was going to the club, doing the bus stop, doing my freestyle dances. I didn't think anything of it. This cat, I remember this cat was extending the Hey Miss Broadway by Belle Epoque. Money, yeah. Doom 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 doom. How you gonna da 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 dee da 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 dee? Or Sharon, Rocket in the Pocket, and extending those. Though they were doing that even for radio discos, DJs cutting quarter-inch tape and extending songs from productions. Disco.
This show is messing up everything.
and they were played on 92.
Here comes Brooklyn.
They would play it on Kiss, and they would play it on BLS.
Yeah.
Chef Pettibone.
Yeah.
You had later on the Latin Rascals. You had all of these dudes who were DJs who would actually get the reels and redo songs, and even eventually hip hop started doing it. That's where the concept of hip hop remix came from these disco DJs getting the reels and recutting these records.
But of course it did.
You had to cut the records.
Yeah, and remember when hip hop started at the Park Jam, right? What was the Park Jam? It was a substitute for discos downtown that you couldn't go to, so they brought it up to the middle school kids. It was all disco. Does everyone know where rap comes from?
Disco. But
no.
Wait, here comes the judge.
No, not disco.
Pygmy?
Before.
Well, I mean, when I say disco, I mean like, DJ Hollywood, when they was doing
rap. A lot of people, sometimes you hear people say, the last poets were the ground zero to rap. And that's listen, I was in high school and in college when the Last Poets came out. Last Poets, yes, spit lyrics, and it was in the style of the revolutionary sound that really came from California and the East Coast. Before anyone said yo, people would say, say man, and da-da-da-da-da, and it was this sing-song way of speaking, and it was the way the Black Panthers spoke, and it was the way the revolutionaries spoke, and it was da-da-da-da-da, and it was like, it was the way that, and that's how the gang spoke. If you see that documentary in the peace treaty in 71, it was like wow man, you came in my territory and we had to wow. It was always like wow. Nobody said yo yet until, and you know what you brought yo was Rocky, the movie Rocky. So everything they say about we were like the predecessors of rap is bullshit. That's not true. Rap comes from 1930s and 40s R&B radio DJs who would get on the turntables and play hit records and in rhymes hype the record and you can look it up. It's so easy to find. I'll share it with you off TV. You had DJs like from Miami. That's why Jamaicans have toasting and everything and toast on records, because of Miami and Southern and Georgia and all these Southern radio stations playing R&B music, rhyming to it, saying, and this is da 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 da, and it was all a party. It wasn't that and say and da da da. It was a party, hyping a record, selling James Brown record or selling whatever record it was that they were playing. Going back to the 40s, these DJs would rhyme, and you should hear some of the names that they had and some of the ways that they. I've got it. I can't find it right now. It's probably somewhere in my drive. But rapping in the style of rapping that came out with Sugar Hill Gang and before, with Kaz and Mo D and everybody else, that the predecessor of that are all radio R&B DJs mainly from the Midwest and the South, not even from New York or whatever. But then you hear these Southern and Midwest DJs and their rap style hyping records. Now you start to hear it in the 60s and 70s with New York and East Coast-based DJs like from WBLS. I just mentioned his name earlier.
Crocker? Freddie Crocker?
Frankie Crocker. Frankie Crocker is a grandchild of these DJs from the 40s.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay.
And he was one of the first to take a chance at playing, a lot of, the early rap stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mr. Magic, of course.
I want to talk about, since we're talking about rap, right? Which is the thing that everyone talks about.
Wait a second.
Oh, we're not done yet? All right. Okay. Well, hey, Mr. Holman, you have the mic.
So I meet Ruza Blue at the party at the Ritz, where the first time this Zulu Nation Throwdown is what it's called. She says, "Hey, I've got a night at this club called Negril on 2nd Avenue and 12th Street that I inherited from the manager of the Clash named I forget his name now. Anyway, he's let me have it because he's busy being the manager of the Clash. Cosmo Vinyl is his name." And she's doing, I guess, new romantic nights every Thursday night. She said, "Would you bring your hip hop review, your thing that you just did for Bow Wow Wow, to my club?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "Yes, another victory." Now I had a place for all the elements to be in a club on a regular basis. And that happened. I met her that night, September 14th, 1981, at the Ritz. And we conspired to do this at this club. And I always thought that the first night was like in October or November 81. And she had to correct me. It wasn't until 82, early January 82, that we got Negril going. Now, this was a battle with Floor Masters versus Rocksteady. Fascinating story. What happened was this. For the first couple of nights, Rocksteady, Bambaataa would play records, Jazzy J would play records, then Rocksteady would perform just simply going down and dancing for about half an hour for my friends, my East Village, new wave, no wave, punk rock friends downtown. After a while, I said, man, I approached Legs, and Legs says this in the drink show, whatever.
Drink Champs, yeah.
Drink Champs, that he forgets that I'm the one who went to him and said, "Yo, man, instead of having you guys just perform, I want a battle. I want my crowd to see a real battle." And he didn't want to do this because it would have taken shine away from Rocksteady, but eventually he said, "Okay, fine." So Rocksteady, unbeknownst to me, Rocksteady and the Floor Masters had a battle set up maybe weeks before at Kennedy High School. For some weird reason, neither of them went to Kennedy High School. The whole school turned on both of. Oh, I've got to cut this. I've got to finish this up, and finish this story up, and we've got to pick this up in another episode. I'm gonna have to end it here. Sorry.
There's too much, man. There's too much. But yeah,
I've got my wife has a lot of work to do, and I can't carry on.
Real quick too before you sign out. It's like Dr. Derek had to leave early, but so we talked about how there was Enjoy Records and Sugar Hill Records. They were making a lot of the, Sugar Hill Gang and the Grandmaster Flash stuff. And I want to bring it up before we cut the show, is that that was the sound. This is pre-sampling era, right? They're replaying, like, it was like Tito Puente and them, where they're going to Enjoy Records, replaying breaks, right? Like Good Times is a remix of the Chic. Rapper's Delight is a remix of it, a note maybe off. That's Chic's Good Times, right?
Right.
And so that was the sound of hip hop prior to what Rick Rubin wanted to do. Was he wanted to make a song with Tila Rock that sounded different, that sounded like what they played at Negril's. So I was just like, when I heard that on Joe Rogan, I was like, there's a connection, because now we just talked about. He said that.
Give me 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes. I told you I was going to do it somewhere else.
Oh, good. So he said that on the Joe Rogan show. Rick Rubin talked about Negril's and talked about he wanted, because the sound at the time was the Enjoy Records Sugar Hill sound. So going to Negril's.
Listen. I've got to stop right now because my wife is a very busy thing. I can actually go to another place if you want to pick this up in 5 minutes. I can go somewhere else.
Yeah, call back. We can continue call back, and we're just gonna talk a little bit, and then just call in, and we'll do the same thing. You can do it on your phone.
I've got to go to another location.
Yeah,
I'll pick this up again.
All right,
okay, you guys.
Cool. All good. So just to get to the audience, man, this has been obviously the show is getting really deep.
Bro, we ain't even scratched the surface,
dude, and that's the thing.
At all.
As Michael's rearranging his place. So the song he's talking about, Rick Rubin talked about. He said this. He talked about, hey, because the songs at the time were replayed, and again there was a lot of Latin percussion and replayed like disco sounding records, like with all the Sugar Hill Gang stuff didn't sound like, they sound like disco with rap over, rhymes over disco tracks, right?
They were disco, or they were just street breaks that were popular in the streets that were remade by bands in the studio.
Yeah. So this is a Rick Rubin beat, his first production. It's called It's Yours. So he said on the Joe Rogan show that he didn't want to sound like Sugar Hill. He wanted to have his unique sound that sounded like Negril's, and that's what he came up with. And eventually he became part of Def Jam. Then he progressed on to producing people
Do you know the two original people in Def Jam?
It was him and Russell Simmons, I'm assuming.
Nope. Russell Simmons inched his way in and inched out Jazzy J. It was Jazzy J
word.
and Rick Rubin, who were the original dudes. When that album came out, that was Jazzy J and Rick Rubin, because Jazzy J had a studio, and a lot of hip hop artists recorded out of his studio. Diamond D started there, Fat Joe started there. A lot of people started, and a lot of people don't know that. Russell inched his way in and pushed Jazzy J out.
Word.
I think Michael Holman could talk about that, because he actually knows Russell Simmons.
Yeah.
And I've heard him talk about.
And this is why I wanted to have him on, because he's so behind the scenes. We're used to the people that are in front of the scenes, but he was behind the scenes for a lot of this stuff. And like I said, he even documented like a lot of the stuff that we even watch as far as being dancers ourselves. There's a lot of the stuff that he's captured, and I didn't even realize that was his footage.
Yo, let me ask you this: did you guys know that Flip Rock and Little Lep was battling with Rocksteady at Lincoln Center?
Yes, that's what. I saw your interview with Glide. That's why with the original Glide, I saw that interview. And yes, I'll have you on the show eventually.
I didn't remember him saying that though. The Little Lep and Flip was battling with Rocksteady.
Yeah, or maybe it was Flash's interview. Because shout out to Flash. Because I don't know if you've seen Flash.
It might have been. It might have been.
Knowledge that they were Rocksteady members temporarily.
Yo, shout out to Lil Lep, shout out to Flip Rock, shout out to Seven Deadly Sins. You know what I'm saying? what was dope is to hear that he actually was connected with Incredible Breakers when they're called Incredible Breakmasters. That is really dope.
That is dope.
You know what I mean? So, because to me, like, you know, like
even
when you think of Rocky,
before that,
right? Yeah. This is what I'm saying. That became, and we haven't even talked about New York City Breakers. You know what I'm saying? We should.
We didn't even talk about New York City Breakers.
So check this out. As we wait for him, hopefully if he comes back, check this out. I'm gonna do this segment. This is you know, the chat's going crazy right now.
Is it? I can't see the chat.
You don't want to see the chat right now. It's everyone arguing with each other right now. Because cool. Michael, Mr. Holman brought up a lot of like the South, you know, the argument of hip hop coming from the South. So the chat's going crazy right now. But, so I want to lighten the mood a little bit. Go ahead, Vix, while I'm setting this up.
Yeah. I mean, I understand where Michael Holmes coming from, and I understand where someone who may disagree with him is coming from. You know, because it's all about context. You know, like I was saying, as far as, you know, distinguishing or making a distinction between an influence and then creating that thing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, you know, did that South have influence on hip hop? Of course. How could you say the South didn't have no influence on hip hop if most black people came from the South and their families came from the South? So in that way, of course, it had a huge influence.
But if you
but I wouldn't say that as a whole, like, how would you say? 100%, did it come from the South? No, it didn't.
But
you know what I'm saying?
You take away everybody's influence. This doesn't look the way we know it right now. You take away the Latino influence, hip hop doesn't look the way it does.
No.
Because here's the thing. Because
everything in its context has a purpose, serves a purpose, added to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Transformed it. So everybody over here arguing, you know, who isn't and who isn't, and guess and all that. We need to knock that off and build this, because guess what? There are forces right now that are working to have some Coca-Cola or Pepsi come in and say some dude named Marshall invented this culture.
Right.
So then you're going to be realizing, like, while we were fighting, we were all in division. A corporation came in, and now everybody, the new generation, believes that that's what it is. You know, it's bad enough.
Like the rhyming
we have right now. We need
to
educate and put shit back in its proper context and perspective. And
exactly,
it takes all of us to work with one another. We're not going to get it right all at once, but if we work together, we will slowly get there. But if we don't, this shit is going to be taken from us right from under our noses. And
I'll give you an example. Like when you're talking about with the rhyming. You know, when Michael Holman was talking about the rhyming, and like it comes from, you know, wherever, you know, in the 40s, you know, I would say, like Grandmaster Cass said, hip hop didn't invent anything, but it reinvented everything. You know what I'm saying? Rhyming is something that goes back to the beginning of time. Rhyming words, maybe melodically to music, right? But MCing in the hip hop context comes from New York.
But you know what, difference? Vince? You know what, Vix? We've had this conversation recently about, you know, like, you know, based off of, you know, the stuff that recently, you know, that myself and Profo kind of got in a hot water about moves.
Robbie Rob, shout out to Robbie Rob.
Well, we realized it's about, like,
yo, Profo, you was dead wrong for that.
That we introduced, but then
I'm messing with you.
Then there's things that, you know, that were created from this culture. So the difference between what was created from this culture and being introduced, we have to be a little more on point and clarify that so people, you know, can understand, you know, and people know the difference or whatnot. Because there are things in hip hop culture that we created from other things, and then there's some things that were created just, you know, from just the creativity of our culture.
Right. Like was Melly Mel really like listening to people from the 40s when he started MCing?
Probably not.
Probably not. You know what I'm saying? It was a recreation. You know what I'm saying? It's something that just came full circle, you know, came around again, came in style again but in the hip hop way, in the hip hop style. You know what I'm saying? And that's what MCing is. So that's why, I understand what he's saying, but at the same time, putting it in a hip hop context, they wasn't doing it the way, we doing it hip hop. They wasn't doing it.
All right, so I'm as we wait. Oh, there he is. Cool. Perfect segue. All right, you're back. Woo, I was worried. I had to bring this up. So we're talking about
deep trouble, man. I'm in deep. That's okay.
Sorry about that. I mean, because again, you probably thought we were gonna ask, like, the break dance, and like we're going like, I told you, this is the dark web. Like it's the hip hop dark web for a reason, and we're not. And so just before you guys signed off, we were just having a discussion about kind of like what you were talking about. And before you left, like, yeah, I didn't pull up the clip, but then Rick Rubin talked about how he didn't want the sound that they were making from the Sugar Hill and the Enjoy records. He wanted that Negril sound. And I played a little bit.
Wow.
Yes. He talked about, which was like, yeah, he felt like, in the Joe Rogan show, Rick Rubin talked about how the Enjoy stuff and the Sugar Hill stuff, the Sylvia Robinson stuff sound too clean. It sounds too polished. It sounded too disco.
Right.
So I played a little bit of his first song that he produced. It's called It's Yours by Tila Rock.
No, I know that song. I was in the studio when they made it.
Oh, word. Okay.
I thought you said you had him on Joe Rogan saying.
No, he says it. I don't have it on. I didn't record it. Like I was just watching. I was like, oh, that's another reason why I need him on the show. I need Michael Holman on the show.
I'm gonna definitely watch Rick Rubin on Joe Rogan. I want to hear him say Negril.
Yeah, he says it. He says it. He says, I want the Negril sound. And I played a little bit. I'll play a little bit right now because of copyright. He can't play the whole thing. And then I'm gonna talk about something else because the chat's going super crazy.
But when he says Negril sound, what does he mean?
Because like when you hear
talking about breakbeats that African Bambaataa was playing.
Yeah, he's basically playing. He's talking about what Bambaataa was playing in the park jams.
Like the sound,
so like
because
the raw beats.
Yeah, because so I'm gonna play.
And the
people,
the hip hop from that time.
Let's because there's a difference between, and I'm now that we know, after talking to Mr. Holman, we know that you really do your research and you care and you pay attention, because a lot of people can't hear the distinctions between pre-Marley Marl. You know what I mean? Because after that, that's when the Ultimate Breaks. Shout out to Breakbeat Lou and Lenny at Street Beat, Ultimate Breaks and Beats, that brought those sounds of the jams into vinyl, and that's what Marley Marl used to make his music, right? For Eric B and Rakim, and that was the first of the sampling era. Prior to that was kind of this sound, which is the Sugar Hill sound. I can't play the whole thing. Sugar Hill Records, and it's very polished, and that's the word that Rick Rubin used. He said it's a very polished sound, which is this sound. I'll play a little bit. Here you go. Here you go. Not that one. That's after. This. Right? Very disco-ish, right? And when I guess Tila Rock asked Rick Rubin or something within that, it was like, I want that sound that sounds gritty and dirty and not so polished. So then I'm gonna play this Tila Rock song. And you could tell it's like, even though this is pre-sampling era, right? This is the pre-sampling era. So it's like about producing from the drum machine, but to have that sound. Right? It's not polished.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a break, right? It's not like a break. It's not like the Mexican, but he's trying to emulate that raw boom bap. Even in the end of the song, they say boom bap, boom bap, boom bap, which is basically what dictates like your 88, your music from 86 to 94 is that boom bap, which is from this record. they literally say boom bap in it.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
So, but he said it, quote unquote. He said, Rick Rubin said, "I want the Negril sound. I wanted the Negril sound."
Wow. You know what that tells me though? That's really interesting. I didn't know he said that.
Yeah.
And what that tells me, that's really interesting. And it makes sense because Rick Rubin was at NYU, and when he started Def Jam Records, it was out of his dorm room, et cetera, et cetera. And it was probably what, like 82 or 3 or something, right? 83.
Mm-hmm.
So what that tells me,
it's 84. It says 84.
Oh,
wow.
Okay,
as late as 84. Okay.
And he's a kid in college, right? I would already gotten out of college and was working at Wall Street and blah, blah, blah. What that tells me, and I didn't know this until you just shared that, what it tells me is that Rick Rubin, who would have been like 4 or 5 years younger than me at the time, and I was already, it would have been 81, 82, I would have been 27 or something. So he would have been like in his early 20s, still probably in college. He, unlike me and Henry Chalfant and Fat Five Freddy and Charlie Ahern and Martha Cooper, Rick Rubin didn't know about hip hop uptown. I mean, he probably knew about it, but he didn't probably go to the park jams and didn't know that world.
Mm-hmm.
He's this college kid in NYU. And so when he says, like, I would have never said the Negril sound. I would have said, uptown park jam sound. But for him,
there's no way
for him, Negril was uptown park jam, right? Negril
Mm-hmm.
was that raw, funky, scary, otherworldly place. So that's fascinating for me to think of Rick Rubin seeing Negril as this portal into this world. Like, I'm bringing hip hop downtown for him,
right?
In essence. And one thing I do know is that he met Russell Simmons at the rap party of Graffiti Rock, of my TV show. When we had a rap party, that's what he always gave me credit for meeting Russell Simmons at my rap party. So I'm realizing now that Rick Rubin is kind of like, a new Jack next to me in some ways, that's so funny.
I mean, and that's why when I heard it, it's like, because like, even for me, like I talked about the LA scene and Ice-T owning the Radiotron, and his Darlene, who was in the cover of one of Ice-T's records, right, with his wife at the time. Right. She used to date Ozrock prior to Ice-T, and it was Animation who introduced them. So Little Caesar told me about that. So there's these little I told you, this is the web. This is the dark web. We go deep. Like we go really deep. So the chat's really, when you brought the South stuff, there's a lot of debate right now in the chat. I'm not gonna bring up all this stuff. I want to lighten the mood a little bit. Okay. So we're gonna talk about, before we talk about the New York City Breakers as far as a breaking crew, let's talk about the theme song real quick. I'm gonna bring up the theme song, a little bit. And I want you to talk about the theme song a little bit.
Which one? The New York City Breakers theme song?
Yeah, I'm gonna bring that.
We had two. This one.
On
K-Tel?
Yeah, K-Tel.
Money makers, the one and the New York City Breakers, the big cash money makers, the one and dime heartbreakers, the breakdance battle takers, and it's us girls running down a fucking rhyme, and this is how we introduce them one at a time.
That's a little bit. So it's us girls.
Wild. So that's Shot Rock, man. That's Shot Rock.
Yes. So I'm wondering who produced that record.
I did.
Oh, you did? You made the whole you made the whole song, or?
Yeah, I mean, I made the beats. I wrote the raps and everything.
Where did you get that hook? How'd you come up with the hook of the New York City Breakers hook?
The New York City Breakers back dance battle take, and I just wrote it, man. I mean, you have to remember, by this point, this would have been 84 or 83, 84. I mean, I was in the game for years by this point. Okay, I'm sure I wrote it with Debbie D and Shah Rock and Lisa Lee, but I wrote most of those lines.
Okay, so this is going to be very lighthearted, and this is just.
But by the way, there's another New York City Breakers rap that I also co-produced. That's the rap is by Phase 2. That's different. It's a different.
It's not
rap.
the same. It's not the same. It's not the same melody.
No, it's totally different song.
What's that one called? What's it called?
It goes New York. It's this phase 2 doing it. New York City Breakers are in your town to throw down. Are in your town to something. All imitators. And he writes a rap about each one of the dancers. Oh, that's he describes each dancer and what they're doing. But there were 2 different songs, interestingly enough.
Can you go ahead? Can you sing the hook again? The original, the Sha Rock version. Can you sing it real quick?
New York City Breakers, breakdance takers. I don't remember. Why don't you play it? I don't remember how.
Okay, because I'm gonna bring up this thing real quick. I don't know if anyone noticed this. This is a super lighthearted question. This is super lighthearted, and I like where we're going there. So, have everyone noticed this?
Oh snap! Fighters in the city.
Did anyone notice that?
Oh, they did a flip too.
Snap! They bit.
They copied the New York City Breakers team.
Yeah, that's like our song, man.
The dark web, man. The dark web.
Who copied who though?
Only
they came out in the look. New York, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers came out in the 90s. He came out in the 80s, 10 years later. This is 10 years later. Yeah, isn't that crazy though?
This is over there starting shit.
Yo, but I gotta finish because my wife threw me. I gotta finish the story though about
go for it.
Night. It's real quick. So I'm telling Legs, man, I want a battle. So he's like, okay. And Rocksteady had been battling the Floor Masters. Somebody's mic, gotta turn your mic on. There you go. Rocksteady was set up for a battle at Kennedy High School. I'm sorry, maybe a couple of weeks before, and for whatever reason, somebody at the school, somebody in the club, in the crowd at the school, it was like a school dance, turned on both Rocksteady and the Floor Masters, and they had to join together back to back to fight their way out of the party. It was going to be a battle. They had to end up battling to get out, to survive, and ran. So
I think you said it was the Ball Busters in the book.
No. Oh, maybe so. Maybe it was the Ball Busters at that party because they always had beef with Rocksteady. You're right. Mm-hmm. So they had to fight their way out. And so Legs is like, well, since we made friends with Floor Masters, and so let's bring them downtown. And keep in mind, I've got Negril. I'm managing Rocksteady informally, and I see the Floor Masters, and I see, okay, this is different. They're not dancers with finesse. That was Mr. Freezer. They're not so much. There's action. They're not so much dancers with fluid moves and style and rhythm. Like action right there, they're hard. They're power moves, especially with when you see Pexter. And I thought, wait a second, these guys are different. They're athletes. And I decided right there, and with phase 2, I want to put together an all-star b-boy team that are power dancers, not finesse dancers, but power dancers. And that was the inception of the New York City Breakers. So this is something that's also historic. All b-boy crews before that were like friends and neighborhood crews from the block. And there'd be some dancers that were good and some dancers not so good, and some dancers did this move and other dancers that move. I was like, no, I'm going to create an all-star team that everybody's power dancers, everybody's great at their moves. And I rated Floor Masters for the best. I rated Dynamic. I rated crews from I even rated Rocksteady. And I put together an all-star team. And that's what the New York City Breakers were. And that was their inception.
So let me ask you this. Was that before or after Lincoln Center?
After.
Oh, it was after Lincoln Center?
Yeah,
so would you consider Dynamic rockers like in the same vein as athlete dancers?
More than Rocksteady, yeah.
More than Rocksteady, but not as much as
New York City
Street
Breakers.
Masters.
As the Floor
Okay.
Masters, no, not as much.
Okay.
Was it your idea for the tights?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, a lot of people used it after that. After you guys used it, right?
We got made fun of, but it was, you know, but it was super. They were like superhero. It was a superhero look. We actually went to LA to do Soul Train, and I saw these running suits in a sports store, and I thought, wow, that would be wild. And so these were right off the rack. But later on, we got the New York City Breakers logo silk screen on them, and then we got silver ones, and it was kind of a corporate sports where, you know, where a company sponsors you in a way. I mean, they didn't give us any money or anything, but they gave us free suits. Heinz suits.
Dang, it's crazy.
Hines.
So
on
Flash's interview, you said that a lot of b-boys, and now I'm gonna bring up the original where is it? The original
Icy Ice from battle. Dynamic.
Yeah, shout out to the Icy Ice, man. I thought he was from the Bronx. I didn't realize he was Dynamic until that interview.
Queens.
Crazy. That's dope. Because I mean, for us, I mean, a lot of people, for a lot of the kids in the '90s that came up in the '90s, you know, it was like when Rocksteady brought back breaking to America. Well, not just them, but they had the Jam on the Groove tour. We all kind of like went for that type of aesthetic. You know, they danced more to hip hop, boom bap music.
Right.
But in the '80s, like, honestly, we all thought New York City Breakers were better. I'll be honest, that's what I thought. You know what I mean?
Of course we were better. Of course we were better. I mean, look at Pex, man. I mean, the best, man. He was the best of all to me in the early '80s. In '82, when I put the crew together and Flip Rock, man, for aerials, he was nice too. But to me, the greatest power breaker was Pex, and it was the New York City Breakers for me that set the stage for breaking today, where it is today in terms of like, you know, power moves. It went, instead of going towards a Rocksteady and style of finesse and dance and rhythm, it went more athleticism and power, and that was New York City Breakers, and we were the two biggest crews in the world. You know, it was New York City Breakers and Rocksteady.
Well, you know, Dynamics says the same thing.
Yeah, but come on, I mean, who?
That's what they're saying. They're saying that they're responsible for the power moves.
Well,
so I'm interested to find out, you know, like who, because they claim that they've invented the windmill, and I'm interested to see who really did the windmill first, because if Glad says that he invented the windmill in '80, you know, but then Pex is saying,
I'm not talking about who invented it. I'm talking about who made it a power move. Who
made
power moves, you know?
Right. That's
made them
Dynamics claim too.
Well, I mean, they have some right to do. They have some right to that claim.
Mm-hmm.
But they did a lot of things that they did. They do a lot of circus moves too, like the helicopter.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of things. They were a smorgasbord of moves. And we tried to focus on just power more or less, you know. And sometimes when you look back at stuff, you go, wow, it's not as powerful as I thought. But when you go back to that time, there was nobody to compare. No comparison.
Was Incredible wasn't on that level yet? Because eventually IBM? I heard that I heard that they became eventually the this is around 85, 86 though. I heard that they eventually became the guys that took power to the next level in New York. Mid 80s. Yeah.
No way.
Really?
In when?
Late 80s, like mid 80s, right before it was dead. I heard that they started to take it to next levels.
Well, maybe, but maybe that was in their own, you know, basements and backyards or whatever. I didn't see them. We were performing, you know, on television and around the world. I don't know what IBM was doing at that after I was managing them. I don't know what they were doing. I didn't see them, so maybe they were, but it was going on. I mean, they weren't on on Beat Street. They weren't in Beat Street. That was New York City Breakers and Rocksteady crew. And Beat Street is, I'm sorry, that's for early breaking. That's the defining moment is Beat Street, and that battle, the greatest battle ever filmed. Even though breaking today, female B-boys, B-girls could destroy, guys back from '84, but there's never been a battle filmed like the Beat Street battle.
No.
Right.
No.
Nothing has compared yet so far. You know what I mean?
And the story behind that is fascinating because Stan Lathan, who was directing Soul Train, and he got hired to direct the film, they fired Andy Davis, who ended up going on to direct The Fugitive with Harrison Ford. But he got fired from the film, and they brought in Stan Lathan. And Stan Lathan said to me, because he knew I had already been working with TV directors filming New York City Breakers for years at this stage. He said, how should I shoot this? And I said, listen, man, at this stage between Rocksteady and the New York City Breakers, there's so much static and so much enmity and static and rivalry that you're not going to be able to say, okay, let's set the camera up and shoot it from this angle, and we'll shoot like 5 minutes. Okay, cut. Let's move the camera over here and change the lights, because if anybody knows anything about filmmaking, there's a lot of changing with lights and cameras and everything else. I said, no, you're not going to be able to do that. This is not a battle for film. This is not acting battle. This is going to be a real battle. You're going to get one shot at this. Therefore, you better set up 5 cameras with lighting for all 5 cameras from every angle you can imagine, close up, long shot, overhead, down low, and shoot it all at once. And that's why when you look at Beat Street and you look at that battle in Beat Street, when you cut from one angle to the next, it cuts like butter. Why? Mm-hmm. Because it's all only one take. It's only you're cutting from the same moment from in each camera. So was
it edited? Was the battle edited? Like, was there a lot of clips that they didn't put it in the movie?
Oh yeah. There was a lot that was done that didn't happen in the battle, but I'd say the lion's share of it is on the film.
So most of it is out.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot that happened that wasn't used in the film. Yeah. And I don't think there's any question about who wins this battle. I mean, it's New York City. I mean, come on. Look at
like I said, in the 80s, it was like, like it, and that's why kids that are like 35 don't understand what I'm saying, because that generation came, like, that's a whole history I could talk about. But if you're from the 80s, like, you liked Rocksteady, but it was like the New York City Breakers was like, like, for me, my favorite was Icy Ice. Like, Icy Ice was like, that's the first time we've seen moves like that, period. Like, when he does a literally Icy Ice, or like, when he does tracks and stuff like that, we never see like that stuff like that.
He's not in New York City Breakers yet. Yeah. But it's hard. I mean, I love Doze, but and I love Baby Rock, but when you've got Doze and Baby Rock in there, they can't. How are they gonna? We had this kid Lee, who was not part of the New York City Breakers, but he was in the movie. Right. He was in the Beat Street crew. There's Ken Swift, of course, like rocking the floor. Ken is my favorite today. He's such a great person and a great dancer and historian and b-boy. He's a classic, really great guy.
Yeah, these are the guys these are the guys that still still around, and that's what's crazy. It's like like how like they had their second life, like in the early 90s they had their second life, right? They helped to bring back breaking. One of the elements to bring back breaking in the 90s, and that's what I basically grew up with. You
know who I really give a lot of credit for, because I was very much aware of and a witness to the death of breaking going out of style. I suffered it as much as anybody else. And so I saw it all happen. I witnessed it all happen. I was part of it all. What year was that for you? What year was that for you? The last gig we ever did probably is like 87.
Wow. As far as 87. Wow.
Yeah, 87.
For me, it died at 85. I was 10. So but I was like at 85. But then Little Caesar, Lino from Floor Wars, DJ Renegade in UK, they all said the same. The 86. For them, it was 86.
Like well, 87, we performed in London at the London Contemporary with the London Contemporary Dance Trust and Alvin Ailey at Royal Opera House at Covent Garden. It was a big benefit, and that was 87. And I think 86 we performed for an Amnesty International in Oslo, Norway. But yeah, 87 was the last major gig, and then after that, everything dried up, and I had to leave my really cool loft. I mean, everything just went downhill for me. I went back to school, went to film school at NYU, et cetera, et cetera. But the point I wanted to make was, it died out. I mean, Weibo came in. I mean, it died out for Rocksteady too. It died out for everybody.
You said the Weibo dance came in and replaced it?
People started doing the Weibo. It was crazy. Yep. And I'll tell you, from my vantage point, and I'm not saying I was there for everything and saw everything. There's a lot I missed because I was kind of sofa surfing. I was struggling in the 90s. 90s was a rough time for me. You know, Graffiti Rock didn't get picked up as a series. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it's still, like, go ahead, keep going.
But the people who I saw in New York who really, I felt, gave it that second life was Quickstep and Rockefeller.
Shout out to Quickstep.
Full circle.
Yeah.
They're the ones who I remember doing things like we were doing 10 years before, and they were making things happen. And I thought, wow, okay, this is cool. It's not dead. And you know, who is this guy? I just remember hearing his name, Quickstep. And then years later, I met him, but it was like, and I told him, man, you know, you, in my mind and in my memory and in my experience, because some people might say, no, it was this or it was that. But in my experience, he and Rockefeller were like so important in bringing back the second wind, this third wave of dancing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. So this was like, I mean, this show, I mean, like I just played a clip of New York City Breakers on there, but you got like Run DMC and you know Shannon, right?
New York City Breakers.
This was only a pilot episode. That's it. They only have one episode.
We did the pilot, and of course, you know, at the end of the year, we went to NAPTI in Vegas, where you sell your TVs, you sell your series and stuff. And the general consensus amongst mostly all white station managers from different regions, because that's how you sell TV. It's not sold in one place in New York or LA. It's sold all over the country. Yeah. They were like, well, we already have Soul Train. Why would we, what's this? You know, they didn't understand. And then the ones that did know what it was said, well, rap is a passing fad. It's not going to last. Imagine that. Rap is a passing fad. And then finally, interestingly enough, Channel 4 in LA said, you know something? We'll buy the show if Chicago buys. And then Chicago said, well, you know, we'll buy the show if New York buys. And if those three regions had bought it, we would have had life. And so New York, where we had run the show, I won't say what station and you'll understand why, they said, yeah, we'll run the show. We need to have $10,000 under the table for every episode and blah, blah. It was like organized crime. Mm-hmm. And my producers were like, nah, we're not getting involved in that. And it died on the vine. And we went back another year to NAPTI, and it was again, oh, rap is going to die. In 86, they were saying that rap was going to die. That was a passing fad. And so that really, like, that whole up and then down for me crushed me. But I went to film school and started working on making music videos and hip hop, and started to, you know, write scripts. I wrote the screenplay to the Basquiat film that Julian Schnabel directed for Miramax. And, you know, I got more and more into me as a filmmaker, not a manager and a business person, but an artist. But I was always a filmmaker. And I remember you saying, yeah, we want to get somebody on who was more of the business end, but I was an artist in hip hop too, but I just wasn't a hip hop artist. I was a filmmaker and a writer.
And that's why I wanted you on, because you have a different, like I said, you know, I've talked to Track 2, I've talked to Legs, I've talked to Kenny, but I haven't talked about the person that has a broader sense of, like, you know, looking back. And that's why when I heard your interview with Flash, I was like, okay, this is going to be a good one, because you're going to bring up a lot of stuff. and connect a lot of dots that no one really connects. Do you know what I mean? And again, like, you know, we're more like, we're researchers. We, like I said, when this is like 2 hours and 30 minutes already. And I'm sure you didn't, and I'm sure you didn't, you're like, an hour. I was like, yeah, an hour. And I already knew where we were going to go. I just didn't want to say anything too crazy. I just kind of knew.
I knew too, with my big mouth. I knew it too, honestly.
But so, now that we're 2:30 in, we're starting to slow down. And now I think for the audience right now, they're starting to see the connecting the dots too. Like, we brought up a lot of stuff. That's why I said, okay, this is perfect when we brought up California first, even though hip hop was born in the Bronx. It was kind of like to give a context of where you were. So you saw these things happening in your perspective. Then you saw it, in the late 70s, early 80s. Now you see it like, I think it was the first time, I think Billboard, like
late 60s, early 70s, you mean, in California.
There you go. There you go. Late 60s, early 70s. Yeah. I think the first time, in Billboard, hip hop wasn't in the top 10 in the last 40, 30 years. I think within this was like only, and everyone's bugging out like, oh my God, hip hop is not in, Billboard for the first time in 30 years. But you got to experience, kind of like I said, we talked about Rick Rubin being influenced by Negrils. We talked about you having the first hip hop TV show when, even back then, I remember being 10, and in 85, I tried to do a Turtle, and it's like, that's old. You know what I mean? They're like, already? It's old already? Like, I only had a life of like, for me, I had a life from 83 to 85, and it was dead. People already moved on to like going to like, Latin quarters and doing like more of the social freestyle hip hop dancing that was made out of, these Marley Marl records, like the Running Man and the WAP and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Where then NC Hammer came. So, I mean, you saw that, and like you said, the 90s were kind of rough. And then we have to talk about this film because this is a film that is still referred to today in breaking as the freshest kids. Yeah. And that's how we got to know you. Because we of course we knew like, New York City Breakers, and we knew Graffiti Rock for those who had like these bootleg tapes that were getting spread, because that's the first time I saw Graffiti Rock was a bootleg VHS in around 1992. I was like, what is this? And actually that clip I played of Graffiti Rock, I'm putting it out on blast, but I don't care. So there's a student of Icy Ice named Fever, because Icy Ice moved to Seattle to go to college.
Right. And
he taught Fever from DVS, who eventually became Rocksteady. And he had this bootleg, and he basically took this. I'm putting him out there. He's like, I can't believe you're saying this. But so there's this clip, but there's a dub of your voice and the guy's voice making fun of it. But that was my first exposure to Graffiti Rock. And I thought that was like super funny that that was from a bootleg. You know what I mean? I thought that was super funny that it was from a bootleg. And, you had the first hip hop show. You managed like, a crew that basically influenced a lot of people around the world to keep to break. And, I talked about the Rick Rubin thing. And then you worked with Basquiat. You worked with these artists and all the people like Ahern and Martha Cooper. What do you think of hip hop now? Like, you just were at Summit, but then, that's like us purists trying to keep it together. What do you think of like from let's just say 87 to about 99? Where was your head in hip hop? Did you feel like you were responsible for like this thing that happened?
Well, it's interesting, at the time that I was like really an important player, I didn't see myself as really all that influential or important. I mean, I get that now looking back. I just wanted to share this culture, with my downtown friends. And because New York is a media capital, there were documentary teams from NHK Tokyo, from Canal Plus Paris, France, from BBC, from ZDF Germany. And so it spread out to Tokyo, London, Paris, and Germany before it went to Pittsburgh. That's how weird it was, And so it spread around the world. And then really in many ways, the way that I was instrumental in spreading hip hop culture, especially b-boying, around the world was through my videos and tapes and all the film. I mean, I'm the king of hip hop, old school film and video. I mean, nobody has more than me before 83 combined in the world. And my archives now are in the Library of the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. Jerome Robbins' dance division, who choreographed West Side Story, interestingly enough. So, yeah, you know, in the 90s, as I'm struggling and everything that I was involved in the early first wave of international hip hop is kind of died out, and it's all rap. You know, DJing, gone underground, dance, gone underground, writing, gone underground, right? It's over for the other three, and it's only about rap. I just, you know, was like looking to write my scripts and make my films and get back into my filmmaking, which is how I started in the game. And it was interesting. I went to one of these conventions that I only found out about later in '97, Mickey Blue Eyes in England. He had this convention called Fresh Fest.
Yeah, Fresh. Yeah, yes.
And I'll
Fresh
never
Fest,
forget this moment. This was really telling for me. I'm like bumming around, like struggling. I'm a student again after like 10 years after being out of school. I'm struggling. I don't have much money. I'm like subletting places. And I get this email, hey, do you want to come to Fresh Fest and be on a panel? And it's this hip hop convention. I didn't even realize that they had these conventions going on in Australia and in Japan and all these different parts of the world. And I'm like, yeah, sure. You're going to pay my ticket and give me an honorarium. Okay, I'll show up. So I get there. They put me up in this kind of hotel that's really just an old Victorian home. And there's like a bunch of kids from all over the world saved their money of their little jobs here and there to come to this thing and to be on to witness these panels like Asia One has done with B-Boy Summit. You know, she's been doing it for years. Well, that was going on in other places years ago. And I'm on a panel and I'm you know, finding out that, wow, hip hop is in conventions and all around the world. I'm like blown away. I'm staying in this hotel and these Polish kids from Warsaw, Poland, and clearly they're breakdancers, I can tell by the how size they are, what they're wearing. They don't speak any English and they're trying to communicate something to me. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, they don't speak English, I don't speak Polish. They start to clear out the furniture and the rug from the hotel lobby. And I'm like, okay, they're gonna get down, right? And one of these kids, and they must be 16, 17 at the most, 14. And one of these kids goes into a routine, and I'm watching this routine. I'm going, wow, this looks familiar. And the deeper he goes into the routine, the more familiar it gets to me. And finally, he goes into this freeze, and he has this look on his face. And I realized he just did step for step Chino Action's routine on Graffiti Rock. And it made me realize that he had learned how to do this from pirated bootleg tapes, VHS tapes that he got from somebody, and they copied it, and it was probably grainy, could hardly make it out. But that's how kids in Poland, kids in Seoul, kids in South Africa, kids in Tokyo, kids all over the world were learning how to dance through VHS tapes initially, then maybe later on DVDs. And I'm watching this and I'm realizing, and I can tell this by their body language and their looks on their faces and their smiles, that they said without words, but with action, A, we learned how to break and dance because of New York City Breakers, probably Rocksteady and everybody else too. B, we are these working class and poor kids, just like those kids in the Bronx. And those kids, through their creativity, gave us inspiration and a voice. And if it wasn't for the New York City Breakers and it wasn't for those tapes, we may not be doing this, and we may be in jail, we may be dead. And they were saying in action, thank you. And when it hit me that they were saying thank you, my emotions, I'm feeling it now, my emotions swelled. My heart went in my throat, and I had to thank them and ran out of the hotel and ran outside and burst into tears. Keep in mind, I was struggling at the time. I was depressed. I felt down. I felt like, what was I going to do with my life? It was like I was in a really ugly place. And New York can be hard on you when things aren't going well. And these kids told me in action, not words. And any filmmaker will tell you action's more powerful than dialogue, than monologue. To show a story rather than tell a story is so powerful. And they did that for me. And they told me who I was in this game. They told me and showed me how important I was and thanked me. And I haven't looked back. I mean, it was such a profound moment in my life, and I'll never forget them. And I'll always appreciate and thank them for that, for them to tell me that I made something important in this world. I did something important. I was part of a small group of impresarios and artists. Of course, the artists are number one, but you can't do this without people like me putting you on stage, putting you in front of the film, putting you on camera, putting you on tape. And it just, it made me feel like $1 million.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
That's
It
powerful.
made me feel like $1 million.
And like I said, again, like there has not been a documentary since QD3's Freshest Kids that's documented. And yet that was 20 years ago now. For that documentary, that was 20 years ago. And we still use it as a reference. And I mean, the best thing we have is YouTube, but YouTube is so broken up. Again, that's why we have this this show, because we're trying to piece together these things,
Yeah.
And so it's like I at least have 3 people from Freshest Kids I've interviewed, so I'm like kind of happy about that so far. Like, you know what I mean? And as we wrap it up, because we're almost 3 hours in.
Yeah.
And we still we're almost 3 hours in, and man, this is like exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was going to be a lot of detailed stories, and a lot of like good discussion, good questions.
There's a lot of stories, man.
I mean, at least I'm glad we got
I could
through.
tell them all.
I
have to write my book. That's the
there
thing.
you go. So before we wrap it up, I want to give it to the panel before Michael's last words. Does anyone have anything to say before we wrap it up?
You go first, Pluto.
Pluto goes first.
A question. Do you still interact with Vince?
Vince Gallo? Vince Gallo?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, we emailed. We're not as tight, or we haven't communicated as much as we used to. We were close, and we were roommates at one time, and he was in my band, Greg. And we made films together before he ever made films, or before he was in anyone else's films. He was my first actor, and I was his first director. And we were very close. And he was heavy into b-boying and hip hop, and he was my assistant manager for New York City Breakers. But he left LA a few years ago and moved, I think through COVID, moved to Arizona, bought a house out there, and is like maxing out there. And he said, "You got to come visit me." And I said I would. And now maybe that I'm in LA, maybe I'll go see him in Arizona. He's somewhere outside of Phoenix. We don't communicate as often as we used to. We were very close friends and collaborators.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for asking about him.
Anyone else from Graffiti Rock do you interact with?
Sure. I mean, Mo D and I stay in contact. We stay close. From the Breakers, Lep and Pex and Bobby Potts. We stay really close. Shah Rock and I are really close. I just saw Bruce, the white kid who's doing a little locking in Graffiti Rock. I just saw him at B-Boy Summit.
No way.
Yeah, he was at B-Boy Summit. Who else is in Graffiti Rock that I see? Special K, I see Mr. Wave, Tony Drohorn, Mr. Wave, Tony Wesley, and I are very close. We communicate every week, you know, and Tony Lopez and Tony Wesley, Mr. Wave and Powerful Pexter, we're very close. Little Lep and I are very close.
Oh yeah, I was in Japan with Little Lep before.
Oh wow.
I wanted to tour with him like 2003. Yeah, 20 years ago.
Wow.
Holy crap!
And Vix, you got a last question?
Yeah. I want to ask you about, because you're from California. So me and my buddy, Hurry C, we've been doing a lot of investigation. We're trying to trace back b-boying on the West Coast. And, you know, the earliest we can trace it back is 1981. It's the earliest we can trace it back. I know you guys did Negril in 82, and, you know, from there it spread out through the media. But what would you say, or do you know anything about, you know, b-boying spreading to the West Coast, you know, in 81 or even before 81?
I was in New York from 78, so I wouldn't have known what was going on with b-boying in California that early. I wouldn't have thought it would have been happening, but I could see how some people like Oz or whatever who was from New York would have traveled out there and shown people and stuff.
Well,
I don't know.
A lot of people say that Oz Rock brought breaking to the West Coast.
I heard that,
but
too.
It's not true.
Oh no,
it's not true, because he, according to Caesar and Orko, when Oz Rock got there, they were already advanced.
Advanced?
You know, advanced in
that's
power
what they're
moves.
talking. That's what they claim.
And then this is like 80. This is after the movies, so we're talking 85.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Listen, when the New York City Breakers went to LA to promote Beat Street, and Ice-T brought us to this roller skating rink, and we battled the LA City Breakers, named, I guess, after the New York City Breakers. I mean, I didn't see anybody who compared to. I mean, how is that possible? How could anybody compare to Rocksteady and New York City Breakers and Dynamic and? Okay,
what
whatever.
year did you guys go over there to battle LA Breakers?
When we were promoting Beat Street, so it would have been 84.
84. Yeah,
84.
Yeah.
Well, there's footage of a battle. I want to say it's in 85 or 84. It's the Pony Express versus Shake City Rockers, and I mean they're doing advanced power moves.
What year is this?
84.
Yeah, but you were talking about 81 and before. I'm like, I just.
Yeah. Like the earliest I could. They wasn't advanced
in 81. That's like saying breaking started in LA. I mean.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I don't want to say that they were advanced in 81.
Just reached.
81 is the earliest I can find it.
Yeah.
You know, even though it wasn't advanced, it was basic, but it was the earliest I could find it. But by 84, the footage, watching it, you can tell they were already advanced.
Oh, I would imagine that.
Yeah. So I was just curious about, you know, if you have any theories of how breaking had got to the West Coast.
I think military.
That makes sense. I think military spread a lot of American popular culture throughout the world.
I really think it's military. Yeah. I think it was really like some kids that were in New York, join the military. Hey, I mess around, and you're stationed in Alameda or something like that.
Yeah. There's even cats here in Ohio that was breaking in 81. So it's like, it's interesting. It's like, what happened in 81? You know, because there's breaking on the West Coast, there's breaking here in Ohio, and the earliest that I could trace it back outside of New York is like 81.
81 is when it exploded for me in New York. Like 81 was when I started to represent Rocksteady. 81 was when I put together those shows downtown and started really bringing it downtown. 81 was when Fab Five Freddy and I really brought writing to downtown in 79. But 81 is when it was even after Henry Chalfont's Common Ground show, which he called it Graffiti Rock before me, was 81. 81 is the battle at Lincoln Center. 81, it blew up in New York. So the idea that it's happening already in Ohio and LA and all that, it's hard for me to kind of contextualize, but wrap my brain. But, you know, people exaggerate. Come on. I mean, people, they remember when they were doing something and they'll say, man, I was doing this when I was like, you know,
for me, it was That's Incredible. When was Dynamic and Floor Masters on That's Incredible? Or Floor Masters was on 2020?
Glide said the first one because they battled twice.
Yeah.
Glide said the first That's Incredible was Rock City and Dynamic at the roller rink. And then the second one was the Street Floor Masters and Rocks and Dynamic.
Yeah, before I ever managed Floor Masters, or I know they were already on TV. They had gotten on TV. It was surprised me. I didn't know that. I was like, "What? You were on TV? How is that possible?"
Yeah, I remember I watched that when I was like 6. That's how I know it's 81, because I was like 6 or 7, 81, 82. So I wasn't out here. My cousin was already doing it, but he was a popper that mixed it up. But
did you see New York City Breakers on our first show was on Merv Griffith's show?
No, I didn't see that one.
That was wild. And that was the, we were, you have to keep in mind, I was a professional dancer in the Tubes. And my director, choreographer was Kenny Ortega. And this is like in 1975. And I learned choreography from Kenny Ortega. And when the New York City Breakers and when all B-Boys crews were dancing, and this is another claim, and people can challenge me. Something else I feel like I brought to the game as an outside choreographer was that anytime I saw breaking, it was like breaking on Times Square for change. Guys would be in a cypher and someone would go down, somebody else would go down, blah, blah, blah. There were routines with 2 guys, whatever, the worm and all that, a lot of different things that had been done in the 1930s. But I was like, wait a second, this is like really undynamic. I've seen breakers do great freezes so I started a whole thing with the New York City Breakers. I said, first of all, we're going to be professional. We're going to be showbiz. You do not do a move and then get up and walk away. Every move has some kind of insane freeze. And you got to show me your freeze, or I'm going to give you a freeze, or you're going to tell me something. You got to show me like a killer freeze, and you're going to get up with a backflip and get back into place and keep dancing and moving. And then eventually it was like, okay, not only that, but when you go in, somebody else is going to go out. It's going to be exchanges. There's going to be routine changes. So we started doing these whole crew routines. And what we did, and me as a choreographer, that I think was inventive and novel, and you see it in Japanese routines that the Japanese kids are doing. It's not whole routines because there were a lot of crews that were doing routines. But what we did in the New York City Breakers that I insisted as an outsider bringing in, it was telling stories. In our routines, they had exchanges that had a beginning, a middle that got intense, and an end that had this final routine. You see it in the Kennedy Center honors when we danced to honor Catherine Dunham, and Frank Sinatra's "This Is It Right Here." There was a story being told. It was kind of like West Side Story. 2 crews are about to fight, and then they battle, and then it builds and it builds. You've got Dynamic Dolls in there on the left, and you've got, who that guy is right there with the dark pants and look at those guys, man. This is beautiful. And the guy with the beret, the beige beret, Mr. Wiggles, the beige beret and the beige top and the black pants, and he's locking. You know who that is? That's Kool Keith, the rapper. Kool Keith, crazy. Right?
Yes.
Okay, you don't see him right now. Hold on, wait. I'm going to show you where he is. Right there on the right with the knickers. Oh, shit, he's not there right now. You see the exchange? He went out and he came in.
Like a commando. We call it a commando.
And this is all in a circle. It's all rotating. And this was all stuff that we would work out. I mean, I would create the routine, and then they would pick which move they were going to do, and we would work it out together. And then at the end of this, Matthew, there's Pex. Matthew, Glide Master, when he's doing his fist glides, everybody's doing windmills. Here it starts. Okay, this is when he's first doing it. Okay, he's going to do it again. Okay, there's Fable, and see, and this whole idea of doing this nobody did this before. It was telling. So
that's Cool Keith right there.
That's Cool Keith.
Wow.
With the socks on the right.
Wow.
Isn't that wild? Cool Keith is
Yeah.
in there.
That's Cool Keith. Holy crap.
Yeah, and because I came from this theatrical rock background, I was like, no, there has to be like a whole show. And now you see it, especially the Japanese crews, they do it the best. But I believe very strongly that it came from this performance. There's Kim, and I forget her name now. She in all fairness, she choreographed this routine that the girls did, that the 4 girls did. I let her choreograph that. That's her in the black vest and the white sleeves.
That was that the Dynamic Dolls?
Dynamic Dolls, yeah. So Dynamic was represented in this. Rock. So here it is. Here's the end. Here's a crescendo. New York City Breakers and Rocksteady. And of course, when we were introduced by Walter Cronkite, he called us the New York City Breakers. Well, I wasn't going to argue.
Crazy. All right.
Anyway, I got to go, you guys. It's 9 o'clock. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, yeah. 3 hours.
Real
quick. Real quick. I'm going to the chat. One thing, which is, Holman, do you have the full footage of the Rocksteady versus Dynamic? And if
that's
so,
what I was gonna ask.
Put that shit online. There's some questions.
What are the chances we could watch the Lincoln Center full battle? That's the question everyone wants to know.
For sure. I think we all want to know that.
Well, I resisted showing Catch a Beat for years because I didn't want to offend Legs, and Legs was like, you can't show Rocksteady. You got to get permission from us, and blah blah blah. And that was true. So I never licensed it, for document. I license a lot of my hip hop footage, and I never licensed it. So a lot of people haven't seen it. So, but now that it's on for free and I'm not making money off of it, nobody can really say anything. But it hasn't been seen a lot. Catch a Beat hasn't been seen a lot. I do have a lot of footage from Lincoln Center that is not in Catch a Beat. Maybe one day I'll put it out there.
Yes, but, please let us
know. The footage from Catch a Beat is edited up, though. Yeah. Right?
We want to see the raw footage.
We want to see the battle.
I know you do. It won't help you determine who won, though. I'll tell you that right now.
It doesn't matter. We're all winners if we see that footage. That's how I feel about it. Because we want to see like the movements. This is before Beat Street. So whatever we could see is like, the most we have is like that grill footage is even like recently like, oh my gosh, this is so dope. So
yeah. Well, listen, right. Shout out to IBM, my first crew I ever worked with. Shout out to Rocksteady, my second. Shout out to Dynamic, who and Kid Freeze, who is my good friend and hero, and of course, shout out to the Floor Masters, and shout out to the New York City Breakers, my crew.
There you go.
And to all the B-boys around the world who kept this alive, and to all you guys, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thank you for being for giving up 2 hours of your time.
3 hours.
3 hours. I mean, 2 hours, the hour that you thought you were going to have. And it's a live show. The chat's been on crazy mode. You can catch it later. For everyone out there, thank you for tuning in to the Hip Hop Dark Web with Michael Holman, and I got your name right this time, right here. You can follow him on Instagram right here. You can follow Vix on Instagram right here, and you can follow me at PROFO_FLGZ on Instagram. Thanks and peace. Hip Hop Dark Web Part 4, and we're out.
Love you guys. Peace.
All right, peace. God bless.